Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
So from the ages of 18 to 36, I was in a committed relationship. But then, long story short, we ended up getting divorced and I was thrust into the very unpleasant world of online dating. I tried a little OkCupid at one point and ended up meeting a really cute guy who was totally my type. He had lots of tattoos, he worked out, and he was at least a foot taller than me. But he also loved John Carpenter films and a bunch of horror movies too, which is a huge passion of mine. And we chatted on and off for a month or so, but we lived an hour apart, so we waited until we were super sure that we wanted to hook up, and then made arrangements for the most romantic day of the year, Valentine's Day. It wasn't anything too fancy, we just went to a bar to shoot some pool, but then the drunker he got, the more this totally different side of him started to emerge. And it was one that I didn't enjoy at all. At one point he starts pulling my hair. I'm guessing in a way that he thought was sexy and that I'd enjoy. Well, needless to say, it wasn't sexy, and I didn't enjoy it. And then 2 hours and 2 drinks in, and I was ready to just get the hell out of there. Then, when I asked him to give me a ride home, he tried to get me to do something that I really did not want to do. And I fought my way out of it, basically threatening to scream bloody murder and scramble to my car and drive home. I knew I was lucky that he let me go, and I had no intention of ever seeing this weirdo again. But then the next day, I'm getting my stuff ready for work and realized that I'd lost my ID somewhere. I searched my apartment, nothing. I called the bar, nothing. Then it slowly dawns on me that the creep I was with the night before was the one that had my ID. Either when it had accidentally fallen out of my purse during that struggle, or when he'd deliberately taken it for whatever godforsaken reason. But then, when I call him, he claims that he doesn't have it either. But he does have a lecture for me about how I'm a tease and that's why I'm single, because I just lead guys on. I just want my ID, but he denies that he has it, so screw it. I guess I'll just get another one. My lost ID shows up in my mailbox a week later in a plain envelope that had not been mailed. The idea that he was outside my house without my knowledge really creeped me out. It took me a good while to realize what had actually happened, to be honest. I went home and didn't tell anybody until a few days later. And then my friend was like, "Wait, so he tried to do what to you?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess I dodged a cannonball as opposed to a bullet." And then the day after the date that I had to contact him about the ID, it was a time when the $35 to replace it was actually a lot of money to me. So I called him, and he was so absolutely in his opinion that I had wronged him somehow by not hooking up with him in a crappy dive bar parking lot, and he said that I could have at least put out. I didn't do anything about it, I just never contacted him again. It's not like it hasn't happened before, just in more subtle versions. I never had anybody just try it. It was usually the kissing that turns into pressure to do something more. I've never had anyone forcibly try to make me do stuff with them or try to take my clothing off, just verbal and mental pressure. But anyway, I freely admit that I have terrible taste in men, and that's why I'm currently celibate. I can't trust myself, and it took way too long to accept that, but I'm working on myself. When I was a little kid, I had a best friend, and his name was Paul, and for a while, it was awesome. I didn't have the best time at home. My parents were very strict. I understand that they were trying to raise me well, but my father's military career made it hard for me to be who I was. My mom just followed his lead, so I often felt like I was alone in the world until I found Paul. With a military dad, we moved around a lot, and I didn't have the chance to make a lot of friends. Paul was my neighbor. It was like he took me under his wing, and we became best friends almost immediately. And I thought he was pretty cool, too. He had a lot of freedom at home. His parents let him go out wherever, whenever, even though we were like 14 and freshmen, and he introduced me to a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have been watching, But I was growing up and interested. My parents would have killed me if they knew. I felt freer thanks to him, which is why I didn't notice for some time that things weren't so normal with Paul. At school, we sat at the same spot every day and hung out with the same people, Paul's friends. He was sort of a leader to them too. The first time I noticed something off was the day after we had a little project in class where I met this cool guy from the chess club who liked a bunch of music and movies and books that I had no idea about. And I was a very curious kid, so I just kept talking to him. We went together to the cafeteria during our free period and kept talking about his taste in music and more, and I was pretty riveted. Paul must have entered the cafeteria without me noticing, and out of nowhere, I felt this pull on my shirt and turned to see his very angry face. He asked what the hell I was doing sitting there with that loser, and I didn't know what to say. My new friend was shocked and a little scared, and I had no idea what to do, so I let Paul drag me back to our regular table, and nothing else was mentioned for the entire free period. But I wasn't an idiot either. When we were alone at school, I asked him why he did that, and Paul managed to convince me that I had to watch out with whom I spent some time with. I couldn't be seen with some loser kids from the chess club. Paul said that if I wanted to be a loser too, then he wouldn't be my friend anymore, and that was very terrifying at that age. I couldn't conceive of not having Paul and his friends as my friends after years of not having anyone to rely on, and so I agreed and stopped talking to that guy. The next incident happened a few weeks later when Paul invited me over for some TV and games, and there were two girls there. I knew them from school, but this was the first time I hung out with girls in such a private setting. I asked what we were watching, and Paul made us look at this X-rated stuff on his TV. I don't know if the girls were comfortable with that, but they didn't seem to say a word. And at one point, Paul called me to the kitchen and said that he was going to his room to make out with one of the girls. I told him fine, but I was tired and wanted to leave. He got this angry look again and told me that I wasn't leaving. I was staying and making out with that other girl. I said I didn't want to. Yes, I was 14 with raging hormones, but I didn't want a make-out session with some random girl that night. Paul said that I had to go and kiss her right then with him watching. Otherwise, I could go home and just never talk to him again. All of this just felt so unfair, but that threat again was enough to just get me moving. The girl seemed to be into it, or maybe she was just trying to fit in like I was, but we did kiss, and it was my first kiss, but nothing like I imagined or wanted. I definitely wouldn't have picked for Paul to be there commanding this entire thing. I kept kissing her until Paul left for the other room with the other girl, and I pulled away and told the girl that I was leaving, and she said that she wanted to leave too. And she and I actually never talked again, but Paul told all the guys in our friend group about it and made me out to be some sort of hero for kissing this chick. And I didn't like that, but at least he was happy, and I guess we were still friends. Little things like that continued to happen, but at some point, Paul stopped threatening me with his friendship, and he actually started hitting me instead. It was small in the beginning, like a nudge on the shoulder that hurt a little too much for comfort, wasn't very friendly. He hit me in the back of the head when I wouldn't move fast enough for his liking, and my shins also took some kicks from him. And the things that he was asking for, like sneaking a bottle of vodka out of a store, got worse and worse. I don't want to paint my teen self as the most innocent person in the world. I knew I was doing something wrong, and I still did it. It's hard to even remember what it was like or why I felt compelled to do what he wanted. Yes, he hit me, but it was like a trance that you can't get out of. I once pulled a girl's skirt right off of her in the middle of the quad because Paul asked me to. Actually, I did that completely hoping that I would get in trouble, that the school would call my parents. If my dad had found out about it, he would have forbidden me from ever going out until I turned 18 and left his house. I wanted to get in trouble. I didn't think that there was another way to get away from Paul, but I didn't actually get in trouble. No teacher had seen it, and when I asked about it, Paul told me that he talked to the girl. He said You know I got your back, right? As long as you and I are a team, nothing will ever stop us." I smiled, but I just wasn't happy about it. Paul's demands and his requests increased, and I swear that I tried to refuse, but he was full on hitting me by that point, and those were times when no one else was around. One night, Paul told me that we were going to steal a car, and we could go joyriding. I said no, full stop. We were 15 then, and I knew that he would want me to drive, and if caught, I would be the one to get in trouble. I was tired of his tyrannical ways. Paul started hitting me as always, goading me, hurting my shins, and I still wouldn't do it. He got angrier and angrier until all of that rage just exploded in some serious meltdown, but also a beatdown from him to me. In the moment, I tried to protect myself from the blows, but it wasn't easy. Something had been unleashed, and it wasn't until some guys in some truck parked nearby yelled at us that he stopped and fled. I was fine mostly, just kind of bruised up. I managed to go home and to school the next morning without being seen by my parents, but the teachers and others noticed it in my face. The staff thought that I was being hurt at home, and my homeroom teacher took me to the principal. I just followed along because I didn't want to see Paul, and I only saw him from my side eye with his arms crossed as I walked into the principal's office, but I just kept walking. The school called my parents, and I still smile remembering how that principal, Mr. Perez, and the school counselor faced my intimidating father. They said that they would call CPS and the police to have him arrested, and my mother started crying, and that was when I told them the truth. And I just broke down, telling them how I had felt about being Paul's friend and the subject of his bullying. The meeting wrapped up, and I was sent home for the day. I anticipated getting scolded by my father, but seeing me crying like that affected my dad. He talked to me alone in my room and listened without his usual attitude, and I had never felt a real connection to him until that point. He comforted me in his detached way and told me that I didn't have to worry about Paul again. We were moving again for his new posting, and I swear, I had never felt so good about that news. I didn't say goodbye to a single person at school, and I guess I'll just do it here now, even if years have passed by. Goodbye, Paul. I hope to never see you again.
Street Fighters. In a small village, Henry made his home. Known for his friendly and easygoing personality, he was a familiar face to all. Little did the villagers suspect that beneath his calm exterior, a brewing storm of change was quietly taking shape. Maplewood was a quiet town with its picturesque streets and charming houses. People greeted each other with smiles, and the sense of community was palpable. However, every town has its share of conflicts, and Maplewood was no exception. Henry, a 25-year-old with a sturdy build and a head of tousled brown hair, worked at the local hardware store. He was content with his life, spending his days helping customers find the right tools and chatting with his colleagues. One Sunday afternoon, Henry was enjoying his favorite Kung Fu Panda movie inside his home. The fight scenes in Kung Fu Panda fascinated him, feeling like a street fighter engaged in combat. Suddenly, he heard a sound from outside his house. The sound was as if a real Kung Fu master was in a battle. Intrigued, Henry went outside to investigate. Curiosity piqued, he quickened his pace, and he arrived at the scene. Two men, Jake and Mike, were engaged in a heated argument. Their faces were flushed with anger, and bystanders tried to intervene, attempting to defuse the tension. Jake, a burly man with a shaved head and a tattoo on his arm, was known for his short temper. He accused Mike of disrespecting him, and their argument escalated into a shooting match. Henry, not one to turn a blind eye to trouble, stepped forward, trying to mediate. "Hey, guys, let's calm down. There's no need for this," Henry urged, placing himself between the two adversaries. His calming presence initially seemed to work, As both men took a step back, the onlookers breathed a collective sigh of relief, hoping that the dispute had reached its end. However, tension lingered in the air. As Henry turned to walk away, Jake, unable to control his anger, threw a sudden punch at Mike. The blow landed square on Mike's face and chaos ensued. The bystanders gasped, and Henry, witnessing the unjust attack, felt a surge of indignation. Without a second thought, Henry sprang into action. He grabbed Jake by the shoulders and pulled him away from the stunned Mike. "That's enough! We don't solve problems with violence!" Henry exclaimed, his voice firm but composed. Jake, now facing Henry's strong grip, glared at him with hostility. "Stay out of this, Henry! This is between me and him!" he spat, attempting to break free. But Henry held his ground. "I won't stand by and watch someone get hurt for no reason. Take a breath and think about what you're doing." The standoff continued, but the arrival of a police patrol car disrupted the escalating confrontation. Sirens blared, and Officer Thompson, a familiar face in Maplewood, stepped out of the vehicle. "What's going on here?" Officer Thompson demanded, assessing the situation with a stern expression. The crowd quickly explained the unfolding events, pointing fingers at Jake and recounting how Henry had stepped in to prevent further violence. Officer Thompson nodded, appreciating Henry's intervention. "All right, Jake, you're coming with me to the station. We'll sort this out there," Officer Thompson declared, handcuffing Jake and leading him toward the patrol car. As Jake was driven away, the crowd dispersed, and the tension in the air gradually dissipated. Henry, although physically unharmed, couldn't shake off the emotional residue of the incident. He returned to his routine at the hardware store, but his mind was preoccupied with thoughts about justice, morality, and the thin line between order and chaos. Days passed, and the incident on Elm Street became the talk of the town. Some praised Henry for his courage, while others questioned whether he should have let the police handle the situation. Maplewood, once known for its tranquility, now grapples with the echoes of the street fight. One evening, as Henry was locking up the hardware store, he heard footsteps approaching. Turning around, he found Mike standing there, a bruise still visible on his face. "Hey, Henry," Mike began hesitantly. "I just wanted to say thanks. You didn't have to step in, but you did. I appreciate it." Henry nodded with a modest smile on his face. "No problem, Mike. Nobody deserves to be attacked like that. We should look out for each other in this town." As weeks passed, Henry's act of intervention resonated within Maplewood. Some saw him as a local hero, while others pondered the role of community in preventing conflicts. The incident sparked conversations about unity, empathy, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Despite the initial tensions, Maplewood began to heal. The town organized community events, bringing people together to strengthen the bonds that had frayed during the street fight. Henry found himself at the center of these efforts, not as a vigilante, but as a symbol of the resilience of a small town facing challenges head-on. One day, as Henry walked down Elm Street, the very place where the altercation had occurred, he couldn't help but reflect on the events that had unfolded. The sun bathed the street in a warm glow, and children played in the front yards, blissfully unaware of the recent turmoil. A familiar voice called out to Henry, and he turned to see Officer Thompson approaching. "Hey, Henry, I just wanted to thank you for your quick thinking that day. It's not every day we see someone stepping up like that." Henry nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement. "I just did what felt right, Officer Thompson. We're all in this together, right?" Officer Thompson smiled. "That's the spirit. It's folks like you who make Maplewood the special place it is." And so, in the town of Maplewood, where the echoes of a street fight once reverberated, a new chapter unfolded. Henry, once an ordinary hardware store employee, became a symbol of unity and resilience. The incident catalyzed positive change, reminding the townsfolk that, in the face of adversity, the strength of a community lies in its ability to stand together.
So I've come to find that dating online can be crazy. Let me just say that before I say anything else. You see pictures of someone online, talk for a while, and then meet them, not even knowing for sure that they're the person in the picture. It's really absolutely insane. I only wish that I knew that before downloading Tinder myself. I had gone on a few dates with guys that I met on Tinder, but nothing ever worked out. Most guys just wanted hookups or aren't ready for commitment. Of course, there are also some creeps, but I didn't come across those types too often. After having Tinder for a few months, I met a guy on the app who seemed way too good to be true. He was absolutely gorgeous, and when he messaged me, I was so excited. I got even more excited the more we talked when I realized that we had so much in common. He was so nice and funny, and from what he told me about himself, he really seemed like my dream guy, you know? After around a week of talking, he asked if I wanted to hang out. I suggested a bar near my house, but he wanted to go to dinner instead. I usually like to get drinks on a first date so I could leave quickly if it went bad, but I liked this guy so much and he seemed different, so I agreed to dinner. For purposes of anonymity, we'll just call him Oliver. Now, I was just going to drive to the restaurant myself, but he insisted on picking me up, saying it was the gentleman's thing to do, and so on and so forth. It wasn't the best idea to say yes, but I guess I'm not as smart as I think I am because I agreed and I gave him my address. He said he'd pick me up around 7 p.m. the next day, and man, I was really happy. I told all of my friends where we were going, and they told me that I was an idiot for giving a guy I'd never met my address. I thought that they were all just being jealous, so I didn't take their comments to heart. I started getting ready around 6, and at exactly 7, my doorbell rang. I opened the door and immediately was disappointed by what I saw. He looked nothing like his pictures. Well, not nothing like them. It was obviously the same person, but at least 10 or 15 years older. I didn't say anything, and I figured that I'd go on the date and see how it went because I did still like his personality, over text at least. He opened the door for me and walked around to the other side and got in. We started driving in the direction of the restaurant, and that was around 30 minutes away. He told me how gorgeous he thought I was and that I was even prettier than my pictures, and then very awkwardly he said, "What about me? Am I even more handsome than my pictures?" At first, I thought he was joking. He had to be, right? There was no way that he didn't know that he was much more unattractive than whenever he took those pictures. I really didn't know what to say, but my mom has always told me to be honest, so I decided a half-truth was better than nothing. I said he looked good, but that I was curious how long ago he had taken those pictures. It was immediately obvious he took offense to the question, so I quickly apologized and told him to forget I ever asked. I was hoping we could move on from that, but he clearly took it very personally and proceeded to give me the silent treatment for the next 5 minutes, like some big baby. I had really begun to regret the decision to go out with him and definitely regretted giving him my address. I knew the way to the restaurant, so I was keeping track of where we were going as he drove. I noticed that he missed the turn on the street where it was located, and I told him to just do a U-turn at the next intersection, but he didn't respond. He passed the next intersection, and I started to get a little freaked out. I told him again that he needed to turn around, and again I got no response. He drove along the road, and I asked him over and over what he was doing and where we were going, but he refused to even look at me. We stopped at a red light, and I knew that I just had to get out of that car. I went to open the door, but I saw that it was locked. There was no button to unlock it, and it was one of those locks that retracted inside the door, so I couldn't even manually do it myself. I was trapped. I took my phone out, and as discreetly as possible, I texted my friend my location. After driving for some time, Oliver pulled into an empty parking lot outside a grocery store. He parked in a spot on the far end of the lot. I didn't know exactly what he planned to do, but I had an idea that I was not at all about to let that happen. He took off his seatbelt, and I reached in my purse. He grabbed my arms and tried pinning me down. I fought back against him and tried as hard as I could to keep him off of me. Finally, he let go of my arm, and I pulled out my pepper spray, and I sprayed him directly in the face. The only problem was with using pepper spray in such a confined space is you end up getting it on yourself as well. My eyes immediately began to burn and water as he screamed in the seat beside me. He started calling me every name in the book as he tried wiping his face with his shirt, and during the struggle, I was able to reach over to him and unlock the doors. I shoved it open. I fell out into the ground, scraping my knees in the process. By that point, I was having trouble seeing clearly, and my chest had begun to burn from breathing in the fumes from the pepper spray. I tried standing, but was so dizzy. I kept falling back to the ground. I stumbled as I slowly made my way across the lot. I heard his door open and him yelling at me to come back over. I looked back, and through all the blurriness and tears, I saw him tripping over himself as he followed me. I screamed for help, but no one was around to hear my cries. Oliver started to say that he was just joking and that he didn't mean to freak me out. He said if I just came back to the car with him, we'd go to the restaurant as planned, and that he was sorry. And he says this in between screams of pain from his eyes burning. It was terrifying, and I genuinely wondered if he thought that I was actually going to believe him and go back to the car with him. Is he really that stupid? He was close behind me within no time, and just as I reached the doors of the grocery store, he grabbed me by the shoulders and yanked me back. But the doors had already opened, and I screamed for my life. I saw a man came running out and told Oliver to get off of me, which he then did immediately. And the man helped me up and tried to keep Oliver there, but there was no stopping him from getting back in his car and driving away. The police were called in that moment, and they told me that they'd open an investigation, but nothing ever came of it. And believe it or not, this guy was never found. I moved out of that house that I was living in at the time and just moved back in with my parents. I started to get really paranoid for a while that he would find me, but it still hasn't happened. I use my story now as a cautionary tale for other women going down the same path that I once was. Even you men out there, you never know who wants to hurt you, but it can and does happen, so please, be careful. A few years ago, while I was in college, I would deliver pizzas on my off days from school to make some extra cash. The shop I worked at was in a busy town. You would think the lunchtime shift would be worse than the dinner rush, but I made substantially more money delivering during lunch, mostly because it would usually be large businesses ordering pizzas for their company, and most of the time they would tip nicely. One afternoon, we got an order from some new insurance company that I had never heard of before, which for the record is not really a red flag. Once I started delivering pizzas to businesses during lunch, I found out that I didn't know most companies that I delivered to. And trust me when I say, a lot of these places could use some better marketing, but that's another story for another day. So, I took the order and plugged the address into my GPS. It wasn't far from the shop. The company had an office in a building that had been recently renovated, and right in the center of town was the small business park complex that was filled with old buildings and offices. It was only in the last few years that most of the spaces had been rented out. During the time the story took place, there was still a lot of available spaces in these buildings, and this wasn't the first time I delivered to this business complex, but it was the first time I delivered to this specific building of the complex. It was toward the back of the complex, and there was probably 10 cars in this massive parking lot. I walked inside the building, and I swear I felt like I was in an episode of The Walking Dead or something. It was just so creepy. It was quiet in a very desolate lobby. It had the vibe of an abandoned mall, and what made it more creepy was just the overall atmosphere of the interior of the building. It was dim inside, almost uncomfortably so. There wasn't a person in sight. The aesthetic of the place was all this tile that looked like it was supposed to be marble. There was eerie elevator music playing in the background that echoed slightly because of the lack of anything inside this big open space. And once inside, you walk into the center of the building and into a large atrium where you're able to look up and see all the floors. I can't remember exactly, but I want to say the building was 6 floors. I looked at my order form and I couldn't read my own handwriting. I tried to recall, and I thought the woman on the phone said that it was on the 5th floor. I was purely guessing because the lobby didn't have any type of secretary or directory. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, still listening to the creepy elevator jazz that seems to be playing everywhere in this damn building. The elevator opened to a small walkway where I was able to look over the railing and down the atrium where I had just been standing a minute ago. I could go left or right out of the elevator, and both directions seemed to lead really nowhere. And by that I mean the halls were dark and I couldn't see any light protruding from the shut doors that lined the halls. Since I'm left-handed, I always opted to go left when I'm faced with these types of choices. A few steps down the hall, the lights above my head turned on and I felt a little relief. The lights in the hallway were motion censored, which made me feel better about the dark halls. However, I kept walking down the hall and every office appeared to be shut and vacant. After a minute or two, I decided to do what I should have done in the first place and just call the company that placed the order. It rang once, and then I hung up the phone because I heard someone shout, "Hey," from the end of the hall. I looked up and a man with a sweatshirt was waving me down to an office at the end of the hall. He said in a very shaky voice, "Them pizzas for me?" And without thinking, I just nodded and said, "If you ordered 5 large pizzas, then I'm your guy." The man laughed and I started walking toward him. As I was getting closer to the guy, I noticed that the room behind him was completely dark. The door was cracked, but there was a small window on the side of the door and it appeared that the lights were off. I stopped about 6 feet away from the man and cautiously said, "Are you sure you ordered 5 pizzas? It looks pretty closed up behind you." The man nodded and said, "Oh yeah, everyone is in the back conference room. I like to turn the lights off to save power." I tried not to judge a book by its cover, but this man did not give off the vibe that he sold insurance. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, and from what I could see in the shadows, his skin and teeth just looked disgusting. And against my better judgment, I followed him to the door, and when I was in the doorway, I knew I messed up. I looked inside the office and saw that it was empty and a completely vacant room. Before I could react, the man slammed the door in my face, knocking me and the pizzas over. I got up quickly, a little disoriented, and as I got to my feet, the man grabbed some 2x4 or some other large wooden piece from behind the door and just absolutely rocked me in the face with it. I was still conscious, but I was seeing stars for sure. I pretended to be unconscious, which I know may seem like a coward's move, but I didn't want that man to continue beating me, and I thought in the moment it was a good idea. I could not think straight, though. After all, I had no idea if the man had a weapon beyond that, or if there were other people inside that could potentially attack me if I started fighting back. While I was on the ground, the man starts to rummage through my stuff. He took my wallet, ripped off my gold chain from around my neck, and I could hear him running away. While on the ground, I could hear my phone vibrating from my left side. I must have dropped my phone when I dropped the pizzas. Otherwise, I'm sure this man could have taken that as well. I crawled over and grabbed my phone. It was the number that ordered the pizzas. I didn't answer it because I was convinced at this point that this was all some setup and that if I answered the phone, they would summon me to another part of the building where I would just get jumped again. I ended up staying on the ground and called the police, who did thankfully show up very quickly. While I was waiting, the number kept calling me, and I finally answered, and it was a kind young woman asking about the pizzas since they'd been waiting for about an hour at this point. I get the correct floor and office number from the woman, which was floor number 4, and went to the office with that police officer. As it turns out, this was a real office and a real order, and after a little initial investigation, it turns out the man who jumped me was just some homeless guy who was probably squatting in the empty offices. He saw me and just took an opportunity to strike instead of hiding. The bad news is, they never caught who did it. Unfortunately, this type of crime happens a lot in my hometown, and it's hard to determine who jumped someone based on a very little description and evidence. But there is good news, though. The company that placed the order felt so bad they ended up giving me a huge tip for my troubles. Not only that, but after the attack took place, The company installed a fob for the entrance and a security guard at the front door, and to my knowledge, this man was the last squatter that building ever had. Now that I, a 23-year-old female, am back from Germany, I've had some time to think over the events of my trip, but it's hard to think positively considering what happened to me the last night in Stuttgart, and I'd like a place to talk about it. I'd spent about 2 weeks traveling in Germany for the Euros, and considering how many fellow Scotland fans were there for the games, I never felt completely alone despite being a solo traveler in a foreign country. I guess I became too naive in trusting the older groups of Scots who buy me drinks and chat with me all night about where they're from and who they knew. Just typical Scottish chats, and I let my guard down. That last night in Stuttgart happened like most other nights in Germany. I'd be by myself and would get noticed by a group of older men or women who'd inquire about who I was with. When they heard that I was alone, they'd remark at how brave I was as a good-looking lassie, being there all by myself. I'd then be integrated into the group, drink with them, celebrate with them, and that night, cry with them after Scotland's loss. Determined to enjoy my last night, I said goodbye to my new friends, donned a short white dress draped in my Scotland flag, and went out looking for a good place to drink and dance with strangers I'd never meet again. I met a few people that night, but it was while I was alone that I met him. "That bag's bigger than you are." I heard a jolly older man wandered over to me. It was true. I had my rucksack with me that night. "Where's your boyfriend to carry it for you?" "I'm not sure yet, still deciding if he's going to be German or Scottish," I quipped back with a smile. Most of my interactions would start this way, with a friendly comment leading to an offer to come drink with their group. And after offering to take me to a nearby Irish pub to drink with him and his family, I graciously accepted and we began walking. He was overly exaggerating how incredible he thought I was for doing this alone, bowing to me and excitedly telling passerbys how brave I was. I would smile awkwardly and change the subject. I wish I could say alarm bells were ringing, but they weren't. And after all, he was just a wee Scottish grandpa, one of many that I'd met that night. He began prodding on me if I had somewhere to sleep that night, remarking how they had room in their hotel if need be. "I wouldn't force myself on you or anything." And I froze. It was so unexpected. I truly looked at him for the first time since I had met him. He was a relatively short man, taller than me, with a larger build and wrinkles to match the white hair poking out from under his Scotland cap. He quickly explained how he knew that I'd be cautious about that sort of thing, being a smart girl, and that I could trust him. But again reiterated that he wouldn't force himself on me. I laughed nervously as all the beer I'd drunk earlier seemed to drain from my body, and I began taking in my surroundings. "Where did you say your family were again?" "Just an Irish pub up this hill. So like I was saying." I didn't really pay attention to him. We were still on the populated main street of Stuttgart, but the numbers were dwindling the further we went. My ears pinged an alert to my brain signaling that I had just missed something important, or horrifying, so I mustered up a smile and politely said, "What did you say, sorry?" "That I'm a vegetarian, because I killed my 44th man in a vegetable field." "Oh, I've deployed in loads of countries. The first 6 lives I took were in Ireland." And my blood ran cold. I am a descendant of Irish immigrants who fled to Scotland to escape the brutality of the Troubles in Ireland. Did this man kill my family? Killed 12 in Iraq. I could only listen to parts of his ramblings as I began desperately planning my escape, locking eyes with every person that walked past. There weren't many. We had almost reached the top of the main street now. "Why are you so tense all of a sudden?" The words brought me back to the conversation. "You know, I can read you like a book. I'm doing all this for you, see? I want to protect you. And Molly, I can guarantee you right now, you don't realize how much danger you're in." I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder, spinning round to see a young German man smiling at me. "Scotland," he mentioned to my flag. "I love Scotland." "Is there anywhere to eat around here?" I blurted out, staring at him, praying that I'd turn around and the old man would be gone. Brief confusion crossed the German man's face before the old man began rapidly jumbling up the sentence "Sprechen Sie Deutsch" in an attempt to sound as if he was speaking German. "Essen," I whispered, and the young man pointed in the direction we had just walked from. "There's a McDonald's down there." I turned back to the old man, whose look I could only describe as emotionless, as if he was staring through me, like I was no longer there. I felt another cold shiver before smiling. "I'm gonna go grab something to eat, but I'll meet you at the Irish pub later." As if snapping back to his jolly self, the man quipped, "Now don't be like that. I'm off to a rave just now. I'm playing at it. You don't want to miss out." "I'll catch you later." I smiled, and the man's face again dropped into a blank stare before he turned and walked off. I think the German man called after me, but I didn't hear him. I kept my head down and walked wherever my feet wanted to take me. I couldn't think, only walk. I don't know how I got to the train station or how I got to the hostel. There were no Irish pubs in Stuttgart, or at least not in that direction. Back in September of 2016, I was living just off of St. Martin's Lane in London, and one Sunday, me and a mate of mine met up at our local pub to watch the football game over a few pints. We watched Chelsea barely scrape a point from their match with Swansea City, and then, after full time, my mate got a text from his girlfriend asking if her and a colleague could join us for drinks. About half an hour later, she turns up with her colleagues in tow, and the first thing I thought when I saw the colleague was, wow. She was, without a doubt, one of the most stunningly beautiful young women I had ever laid eyes on, and from the moment I saw her, I was absolutely smitten. For the sake of the story, we'll just call her Sarah. She was half Lebanese, and right away I could tell that there was chemistry between us. Little did I know, but my mate and his girlfriend had conspired to do a bit of matchmaking, as Sarah had sent a photo of me on my mate's girlfriend's Facebook and asked her if I was single. So, they were just as pleased as I was when me and Sarah swapped phone numbers and agreed to go out for a coffee sometime. One coffee date became 2, then 3, and then before we knew it, we were going out together every weekend and eventually decided to make things official. And things went great at first. Sarah was a very passionate young woman, and I loved that about her. But after a while, that passion started to show its negative sides. For start, she could never, ever be wrong about anything. It could be quite cute if she was being playful with it, but about 2 months into our relationship, and she did something which wasn't so cute. So there's this TV game show in the UK called The Chase, and it became a kind of tradition to watch and play along together. We'd both finish work at around 4, and then she'd meet me at Leicester Square tube station, and then we'd head back to my flat to have dinner together. And since The Chase was always on at around 5 o'clock, we'd play along with it while we were eating. One day, one of the questions was something like, which former Beatle first performed his song My Sweet Lord at the concert for Bangladesh in August of 1971? It then gave 4 options, which were A. John Lennon, B. Paul McCartney, C. George Harrison, or D. Edwin Starr. Traditionally, at least in the early rounds of the case, option D was always a joke answer designed to raise a chuckle among the studio audience, and on this occasion, the joke was that Edwin Starr was never actually in the Beatles. It was Ringo Starr that was in the Beatles. Edwin sang that War, What Is It Good For song. Now anyway, I immediately called out George Harrison, which was, of course, the correct answer. But Sarah, who was into much more contemporary music, decided the answer was John Lennon. I told her that she was possibly confusing My Sweet Lord with Imagine, and that in that case, the answer was George Harrison, but then she starts doing her "I'm never wrong" routine. I just carried on eating. Then, when the correct answer was confirmed as being George Harrison, I said, "Told you," in the mildest, most non-confrontational way possible. I didn't rub it in her face. I didn't celebrate. I just said, "Told you," and then we carried on eating and playing along with the chase. Or at least I thought we had carried on playing, because by the end of the round, Sarah's silence told me that she didn't fancy playing around anymore. I asked her if everything was all right, and instead of returning even a sarcastic reply, she completely ignored me. I asked if she was taking the piss, and again, just completely blanked me. So I told her if she was going to act like a child, she was free to leave anytime she wanted. She then grabbed her purse and coat and slammed the door to my flat on the way out. A few hours later, and several ignored phone calls later, she finally replies to my text telling me how horrible and arrogant I'd been, how I'd made her feel small and stupid, and how I owed her an apology. I had no intention whatsoever of making her feel that way, but when I told her as much, she broke down in tears and started apologizing over and over. She said she was stressed out at work, that her auntie back in Beirut was sick, and that it had all just gotten the better of her in the moment. I forgave her, we kissed and made up, and then that was that. Only that wasn't that, as there were dozens more arguments like that in our future. I won't bore you with all the details of each individual set to. We'd be here forever, and I only went over that first one to give you an idea of what I was dealing with. But over time, things got gradually worse until we were falling out over petty little things on a weekly basis. I really liked Sarah. I honestly did. When she was at her best, she was the perfect girlfriend. But at her worst, she was an absolute nightmare. We were together 6 months, and then when the negatives started to vastly outweigh the positives, I decided I had to man up, do the right thing for both of us, and end the relationship before things graduated to the next level, i.e. meeting parents or moving in together. To use as few words as possible, the actual breakup was much like an accomplished Argentine footballer. It was messy. On the advice of my mate's girlfriend, who by that point had apologized profusely for setting me up with Sarah, I chose to do it in a public place. But unfortunately, that didn't really help the situation. Sarah caused a massive scene, wouldn't talk to me afterwards, and it took a week before she agreed to exchange all the stuff that we'd left in each other's flats. We made the exchange, and that time she didn't make a scene. But to say that she was frosty with me would be the understatement of the century. She acted like she despised me. So much so that I was worried that she might have snipped up my underwear with a pair of scissors and then used the same pair to scratch my DVDs. Thankfully, she'd been mature enough to do neither, and I was thoroughly relieved that I could finally close what had been a rather grim chapter of my life. Now fast forward to July of 2017. Sarah and I hadn't spoken in months. I deleted her number, and we weren't connected on any kind of social media anymore. It was a completely no-contact breakup. But she was still on my mind a little bit. I was seeing this new girl, and I'd be lying if I said Sarah hadn't made me a little bit paranoid that this girl would also eventually show her true colors. We'd been on a few dates, but we were taking things casually, and it wasn't until after the third date at a wine bar that we kissed for the first time. I got the tube home, feeling wine-drunk and rather good about myself. Then, after a flirty text exchange and what should have been a cold shower, I turned in for the night. The next thing I know, I'm opening my eyes in my dark bedroom with this distinct feeling of dread tightening my chest. I can't even really explain how I knew someone was there, but I did, and there was. Perhaps it was the gentle creak of my bedroom door opening, or the subtle feeling of my mattress sinking as they sat down on the bed next to me. Either way, I awoke to this instant feeling of vulnerability and terror. I knew how buggered I was, and I'm not exactly proud of it. but my first instinct was to roll over to quite literally beg whoever it was not to hurt me. I spun over in bed, adrenaline pumping, expecting to see some masked burglar, or God forbid, some kind of knife-wielding lunatic. But I didn't see some balaclava-covered face, or the wild eyes of some crazed spree killer. Instead, I saw her, Sarah. I should expect some of you to think that I'd be relieved to see my ex-girlfriend in place of some armed psychopath, but for a split second, I was absolutely convinced that she was there to kill me. I remember saying, "Sarah, don't," as I slid off the opposite side of the bed from her and tried to put some distance between us. But instead of doing anything rash, Sarah simply said, "I'm sorry," and then repeated herself as she got up, walked out of my room, and continued out of my flat. I stood there for a few seconds, panting like the devil, wearing nothing but my underwear and contemplating just how close I'd come to getting murdered. As I said, I didn't have Sarah's contact details by that point, and I couldn't find any of her social media accounts, so I assumed that she'd blocked me on all of them. So instead of reaching out to her directly, I asked my mate's girlfriend to pass a message on for me, basically saying that if she came near me again, I'd be getting in touch with the police. I would have preferred to have kept it between us, I really would have. I didn't want to air out my own dirty laundry in public, let alone anyone else's. Yet, as I'm sure you'll agree, Sarah didn't leave me much of a choice on that front. It sparked a great deal of curiosity among my mate and his girlfriend, who had to pass the message on via Facebook because she and Sarah weren't working together anymore. She said Sarah saw the message and then blocked her without so much as a word in reply. Obviously, the big question on everyone's lips was, how the hell did Sarah get into your flat that night? Well, I have a theory on that. Towards the end of our relationship, I'd say the final 2 months or so, I gave Sarah the spare key to my flat. The letting agency had given me 2 copies of the key, one to keep as a spare, but I ended up giving it to Sarah so she could let herself into the flat when I wasn't around. Sometimes she'd finished work earlier than I did, so instead of having to take the tube all the way back to Wapping, Sarah used to just let herself into my flat and wait for me there. She gave me that spare key back when we exchanged stuff, and at the time, the thought did flash in my mind that she might have made a copy. But then, after weeks went by and there were no signs of any unwelcome intrusions, I decided that I had just been a little bit paranoid. Sarah was intense, but I didn't think she was make a copy of my flat key kind of intense. Yet, as events showed, I might have been a bit too generous on that front. There's always a chance that I neglected to shut my front door properly and that Sarah just so happened to pop round at a time when I just so happened to have failed to properly secure my flat. Or, this is the one that truly scares me, she made a copy of my key, waited a little while, and then decided that she was going to sneak into my flat in the middle of the night and hurt me. Granted, I didn't see any knife or hammer in her hand. All she did was apologize before running out of my flat. But if she wanted to talk, there's a dozen different ways that she could have reached out. She most certainly didn't have to sneak into my flat in the middle of the night and then creep into my bedroom while I was dead to the world. The only reasons that she'd want to do that is to catch me unawares. And the only logical reason she'd want to catch me unawares is because she wanted to hurt me. I moved away from London just before the pandemic, so I'm confident that she and I will never cross paths again. But if we did, let's just say that I wouldn't be in a rush to grab a coffee with her anytime soon.
I'm Marionette, and I'm from a small little town surrounded by beautiful scenery. It's like a hidden gem that no one knows about. But despite the beauty of the town, there's no possible growth for an individual there. So if someone was determined to become successful or even earn a decent sum of money, he or she had to drive for about more or less 40 minutes from the town to the city for a job. People there were unfamiliar with the town's name, so we decided to keep it that way by not telling them until it was necessary. But I was not looking for actual growth when I was hunting for a job. It was more like out of necessity, since I had recently become an orphan after my father's death by accident, who was my only remaining guardian left after my mom abandoned us. Anyway, I was too scared to go work in the city, since I had heard many stories from the town folks who had worked there about its dangers, so I found a job in a supermarket that was on the outskirts of the city. It seemed like it had a great reputation, since the pay they were offering was a lot higher than what I was offered within the town, so I took the job. Surprisingly enough, even the store that was closest to the town had never heard of its existence, and when I put my address on the employee form, they looked at me as if I was someone who had come from an entirely different planet. On my first day, there weren't many customers, so besides basic work, there was nothing more to do. But on my second day, there was a huge rush, so I was busy all day. My job was mostly cleaning and organizing stuff, and when I was done, I would help out the counter. Everything seemed pretty easy, and even the other two part-timers who worked there besides me seemed nice enough, even though they did not talk much. After working for a week, I understood the daily routine of the store. The store used to open at sharp 6 in the morning, and all the employees had to reach 5 minutes before its opening. Right after the store opening, I would have to do the cleaning of the entire store and the area surrounding the store within half an hour. The next thing I had to do after cleaning was check all the product and their expiry date, throwing the expired item to the room that was in the back side of the store. After I was done with that, I would have to change all the meats and the fresh ones that were delivered each day while giving them the old meat. Doesn't matter if it was just a day old, even though the meat was frozen. There were some other rules like that which were a bit weird for me to understand, like what would happen if I came a second late to the store? But since I didn't want to lose my job, and I did not know what they might do if I arrived late, I always reached 15 minutes before the assigned time, and waited for others in the meantime. There were also questions about why replace the meat every single day if they were bought in fresh, and most importantly, what did they do with the unsold meat? There was another strange thing about this store, and it was that even though I cleaned the store from corner to corner, the next day, even the walls would look like they had never been cleaned. It was my first time experiencing things like that, but since the stories I had heard from the city were far worse than one could imagine, I thought maybe it might be common in the city as well. On the day of my interview, I was told to do my job silently without ever asking any questions. I couldn't even escape from my own curiosity. Even if I wanted to ask questions of my coworkers, they always ignored each other, so I didn't think there was any hope for a new employee like me. It was the 9th day of my job when I reached early as always and waited for the store to open. The part-timer who used to open the store came in a bit late that day, so the store opening was delayed just by 5 minutes. She was also new just like me, so it might be she just did that intentionally to see what would happen if we opened the store slightly later than the given time. Anyway, we got in, and just like all the other days, I cleaned the store in half an hour as per routine. And by the time the guy who used to bring in the meat came by, the work wasn't done, so I asked him to wait for 5 minutes. He looked frustrated when I asked him that, but he didn't say anything. So after I was finished with work, I went to take the meat out to hand them to him. Believe me when I tell you that I saw the state of the meat. I couldn't believe that nobody had gotten sick from eating this product from the store. The smell that was coming from the meat was unbearable as it had gotten stale by that time. I didn't have to think about the scary stories of the city to know what this store owner was doing something extremely detrimental to the consumers, since it could make them severely sick. I knew how to report the store to the health inspector, since I'd seen it online when I was looking for a few things, and so I immediately did that without thinking. When I called them and gave them the store's address, something shocking happened. The man on the call told me the address I was giving him didn't exist. I was confused by what he was saying, so I repeated myself, but after saying the same thing a third time to me, he thought maybe someone might be pulling a prank on him, so he disconnected the call. That was when I heard the store shutter closing, so I went to see what was going on. That was when I saw the meat guy and the manager were standing there, and the other part-timer who opened the store late was lying dead on the floor. The meat guy had a big knife in his hand, and he was looking at me like a predator would look at its prey. This store is just like your unknown town, hidden from the eyes of others, but still famous enough to earn me good money. So why are you people determined to ruin that for me? The manager's voice felt so evil that he said that tilting his head. My breath felt like it got stuck in my throat, and my brain started to get foggy, unable to understand what to do next. That was when I remembered the room in the back of the store. There was an exit door there, so I ran toward it. Not again. Chasing is something that I hate the most. Brian, you chase, and make sure to kill her if you want to live. I heard the store manager's voice behind me. The good thing was that I was an expert in hiding and escaping ever since I was a child, so I ran as a rabbit and somehow managed to get out of the store. But even then, I could feel the Brian guy chasing after me, so I kept running until I reached the town's border, and once I crossed it, I was so tired that my legs felt numb. I stopped for a brief moment and turned to see if he was still chasing me, but he had disappeared, as if he had never been there. I was still not sure to trust that, so I kept running until I reached the first house, where I knew I would be safe. My vision started to get blurry. As I was passing out, one question kept repeating itself in my mind. What did he mean by unknown town?
When I first read Martin Luther's quote, "The devil can so completely assume the human form when he wants to deceive us," I thought he was talking about the real one, Lucifer. Despite watching the news of crimes daily, I only realized this was about evil in humans when I experienced it myself. "Excuse me, sir, are you Aiden?" I gently tapped the man's shoulder, hoping he was not the person I sought. Despite sitting at the same table my date had specified, he looked nothing like the pictures I had seen. To my dismay, he responded, "Yes, I am, and you must be Aurora. You look even more stunning in person than in your photos." I struggled to conceal my disappointment, and he seemed to notice my reaction, but still chose to disregard it. After thanking him for the compliment, I hesitantly took my seat before the waiter came and handed us the menus. However, before I could even get a chance to look at the menu to decide what I wanted to eat, he ordered for me without even asking. Such behavior is something I despise. No matter if I'm out with friends, family, or a date, it puts me in a bad mood. Though I refrained from voicing my displeasure, I quietly sipped my water as I waited for the Greek salad that had been selected for me, all the while lamenting my decision to agree to this date. Out of the blue, he apologized and explained that the photos he sent me were actually of his friend. He revealed that he had only done so because of his insecurities. I met him on OkCupid a few days ago and have been chatting ever since. Initially, I was presented with a picture of a tall, muscular Latin man. However, upon meeting him in person, he appeared shorter than me and did not possess the Latin features I had expected. What put my mood off wasn't his looks or height, since my ex was also shorter than me, but the fact that he lied. At that moment, I felt deceived and apprehensive about the date. It felt fake to me, but I did not want to be impolite by leaving immediately, so I decided to finish the lunch, at least before I started ghosting him. As I was eating, he started asking me all these weird and awkward questions that were highly inappropriate. I told him I was uncomfortable answering them, but he took it lightly and started laughing as he said I was making a big deal out of nothing. I wasn't a fool not to notice all the red flags he kept dropping on me. It was becoming increasingly clear that things could escalate and become dangerous if I didn't remove myself from his company. After finishing the meal, I got up, saying, "Thanks for the meal. I'll be leaving now. It was a pleasure meeting you, though." He scrunched his forehead in confusion and unexpectedly grabbed my hand, uttering, "What are you doing? Our date is not over yet. You ought to come over to my place." I yanked my hand back in shock and horror. What's wrong with this man? We barely conversed enough for me to feel obligated to adhere to his request. I quickly invented an excuse, citing an urgent matter at home, and exited without causing a commotion. Despite my attempts to evade him, he persisted in his pursuit. He made another grab for me, but I managed to dodge him. As I continued walking away, he followed me, demanding I stop. I reiterated that I couldn't stay, but he responded with a barrage of insults. He accused me of being inexperienced in dating and insulted my appearance, insisting that I should feel grateful for the opportunity to be with him. Though I was tempted to retaliate with equally cutting remarks, I refrained from causing a scene and kept walking, determined to put as much distance between us as possible. He didn't stop following me. His footsteps grew louder and closer as he shouted that I would regret it if I didn't stop. I was highly disturbed and scared at this point, praying for him to give up. But suddenly, he shoved me roughly from behind before blocking my path. My heart was thumping so loud that I feared it would come through my throat. I wished for someone to notice us and come to my rescue, but people kept walking by without paying attention. His gaze swept from my forehead to my toes as he scrutinized me. Suddenly, he burst out laughing and remarked, "You look like you're about to cry." His demeanor gave off a disturbing vibe, and he leaned toward my ear to whisper what he wanted to do to me. He told me that this was nothing in comparison to how much I would cry even more by the time he was done with me. I shot panicked glances at the people walking, but it was useless. As he was about to say something else, adrenaline rushed through my veins as I gathered the courage to kick him in his groin and run toward the station without looking back. Tears started flowing through my eyes as my legs sped up and reached the station. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since morning and was on the urge to faint when someone grabbed me, which made me jump in fear that it was Aiden again. Instead, it was a middle-aged woman asking me if I was okay. My swollen, tear-filled eyes, red and sniffling nose, and disheveled look didn't let me say anything, and she started patting me on the head, saying everything was fine. She led me to the nearest cubicle, and I sat there for about half an hour shaking, and the woman just stayed beside me to ensure I was okay. When I realized I was wailing in front of a stranger, I immediately apologized for wasting her time. "It's okay. You don't have to apologize. It's not your fault. I was the one who chose to help you," she said politely as she flashed me with an angelic smile. I thanked her before heading inside and taking the metro to my place. I deleted Aiden, and my WhatsApp chat, blocked his number, and deleted all the dating apps from my phone. I spent days locked up inside my apartment, fearing he would find my place and come for me. However, it's a relief that nothing of such sort happened. I didn't meet anyone for days and started avoiding blind dates or meeting alone with strangers. This happened years ago, and to this day, it's the worst first date experience I have ever had. My friends still try to set me up with people for being single for this long, but I turn each one down. While she did not meet me when Aiden threatened me, that woman who offered me solace and water still felt like an angel. She dropped whatever she was doing, whether urgent or not, and made sure I was okay, unlike those who saw me in danger and still chose to ignore me. People like her are rare these days, and I pray they don't get extinct, because it would be the end of humanity then.
You know you deserve all these bad things that have been happening to you. I looked at Porter as he said this with dead eyes. What do you mean by that? I asked while clenching my fists that were ready to throw at him any time. I mean what I mean. You're ugly, and you deserve all the bad things that happen to you. He was still as calm as the wind, as if it did not even matter to him what he was saying could hurt my feelings. "You're mean," I said, and ran away while crying, as he continued looking at me with the same cold, dead look in his eyes. I was in 3rd grade back then when I first noticed that Porter did not care if his actions or words hurt those around him. He did not smile much, and his responses were the bare minimum. But whenever he did smile, he still had the most charming smile among others, which was the reason I started to crush on him. It was one day during recess when I was walking back to the classroom. I saw Porter standing in front of a girl. She was skinny, with straight hair that came to the neck, and she was laughing goofily. That was when I saw her touching his hand, which he slapped away, and then he started slapping and beating her with the same cold, dead expression on his face. I don't know why he was doing that and what the girl did to piss him off, but I ran to call a teacher. When I came back to the teacher, he was still beating the girl, until the teacher had to pull him away and ask to stop beating that poor girl. He got suspended for a week due to his violent behavior, and I kept wondering why did he do that? And why he never looked as if he did something bad. It was as if it did not occur to him that it would hurt her, or she might not like the way he treated her. At that time, he seemed to me as an emotionless, violent monster. He came back to school after his suspension period ended, but he became even quieter and more self-reserved than he used to be before. Students started to avoid him, since they were all scared of him, including myself, and he didn't care either. Even if any of them tried to talk to him, he would simply just drive them away with his meanness. I still thought of him as charming as ever, and I still had my little crush on him, but I was too scared to show that to him or anyone else for that matter. Time passed just like this, and it was finally time for the result of our final exam. And during those times, Peter had already been suspended 3 times for violence, and he was on his last warning before being expelled. After that, he transferred schools. I did not hear about him until 2 years later, when one day, my mom talked to one of her friends about a playdate for us. The family had moved to the area 2 months ago, and Mom became friends with her during a spa session. Anyway, so Mom took me and my little brother Kirby to her friend's house while explaining to us during the entire car ride that we should behave and not do anything troublesome. Playdates were a weekly thing. Mom would often call any of her friends and schedule a playdate for us with their children, and then the parents would spend their day relaxing or something like that. As Mom walked into her house, her friend introduced us to her daughter, Cecilia, who was 2 years younger and around the same age as Kirby. But for some reason, she looked rather familiar. I knew I had never met her in my entire life, but she still looked as if someone I may have known from somewhere. She told us that her stepson was sick and sleeping in his room. I was curious for a few minutes about how he might look, but then I got over it and started playing with Kirby and Cecilia. My mom and her friend went out for the day after informing us that Cecilia's father was in the living room watching TV, and if we needed anything, we could ask him. We were in the middle of playing when I heard someone's footsteps. I turned around to see the back of a boy entering the living room. I guessed he was Cecilia's stepbrother. We could hear the voice of a movie playing coming from the living room, so I figured he might be watching it with his father. About an hour later, as the movie finished, we heard the loud voices of arguments coming from the room. "You believe what you want." It was the boy's voice, and as he left the room, I turned to see his face, and I recognized it in an instant. It was Porter. No wonder Cecilia looked so familiar to me. He climbed the stairs and went to his room. His father followed him with an angry expression on his face, and then he started banging on the door and shouting, "Open up! Open up!" The 3 of us quietly went to see what was going on, and we saw his father knocking a hole in the door in anger. I could see that his hands were bloody and swollen, and could Porter through that hole, but I guess neither his father nor Porter cared, and that was terrifying to me. Kirby had started to cry from the horrifying scene playing in front of us, and Cecilia looked distraught, but she didn't cry. I guess she must have been used to this. The 2 of them didn't care about the terrified children looking at them. Porter's father kept working on the hole he was punching until it was big enough for him to unlock the door from the inside, and as he did, he smiled so widely that his teeth showed. That was when we heard our mom entering the house, and Cecilia's mom rushing as she heard the crying sound. "What the hell do you think you are doing in front of the kids?" she roared, pulling her husband away and giving a warning look to Porter. She apologized to our mom multiple times for whatever happened in the house, and her mom told her that it was okay. But I knew that she was just as scared as the rest of us. Her expression told us that she was relieved that we just got out of there in time. As Mom was taking us away with the promising look on her face that she would never bring us back, I saw a porter looking at us from the window with the same cold, dead look on his face that he always had. Thinking about his father, I now understood why he was the way he was. Whenever I remember her, my heart is filled with happiness and grief. The one I wanted to be my forever. Memories of the days I spent with her now feel like an inaccessible dream. Her hearty laughter still plays in my ears like a beautiful melody. The warmth she imprinted on my body lingers at every inch of my skin. Even though my heart breaks into a million pieces every day in her absence, I've come to enjoy longing for her, for I know there will come a day when I will finally reunite with her. Even though I didn't want to be here, I was at this fancy, expensive restaurant whose even cheapest dishes were out of my budget against my will. I sometimes wonder why people make friends. Is that so they can be the sacrificial lamb in their instead? Like I was feeling at that moment. The more out of place I felt at that restaurant, the more regret I felt for being friends with Lance. As I was focused on the menu, trying to decide if I shouldn't eat and only let my so-called blind date order whatever she wanted for herself, perhaps I could escape the rest until my next salary, I heard a knock on the table. I raised my head only for my eyes to meet with a pair of green ones that were covered with shadowy makeup, making them appear even dreamier than they were. "Are you my Valentine, Marcus? I'm Natalie." Her slow, soothing voice met my ears, and I couldn't help but nod my head in the affirmation, although I was not the Marcus she was looking for. She gave a dazzling smile before pulling out a chair and sitting across the table. As I was mesmerized by her beauty, she was looking at me and apologizing for inconveniencing me. She said her friends pushed her for this date because they felt pity that she was always alone on this day of the year. Upon checking the menu, she hesitantly looked at me and asked, "Should we go somewhere else?" I realized she felt uncomfortable with overly priced dishes as well. Feeling a bit more comfortable in her presence, I nodded my head yes, and we headed out. She then suggested a few places nearby that served great food at reasonable prices, so we went to one of those. I don't recall what happened with my actual date or the real Marcus, but I sure remember turning off my phone so no one could disturb my time with this angel. We talked for hours while enjoying our meal. She was the one mostly doing the talking, and I was lost in her melodious voice. Her calling me Marcus made me feel bad, so I decided to come clean. As I told her what truly happened, she silently stared at me briefly before saying, "I know. I figured you weren't him since you aren't the self-centered chatterbox I talked to over the phone yesterday." After that, she just laughed, and I couldn't help but laugh with her. Fair to say, I had fallen hard for her. Before I met her, I never knew I could love someone. We started dating, and trust me, every second of my life that I spent with her was the best. We would record small things that we did and would watch them later together. I asked her to move in with me after 6 months of dating, and she did. I wished everything would stay like this forever. But little did I know, it was just my wishful thinking. That day when I was in the office, I got a call from her, but before I could answer it, my boss Rose asked me immediately to show her the proposal I was working on. It was weird, since I had just started it 2 days ago and there was still time left until I finished it, but she made it sound like I was past my submission date. I had to re-explain the proposal multiple times, which made me feel she was deliberately picking on me. About an hour later, I returned to my desk, frustrated and exhausted. I grabbed some water and gulped it in one go before looking at my phone. It had 10 missed calls from Natalie. I tried calling her back, but her phone was turned off. I started getting worried, so I decided to head home early and see if everything was all right. However, when I went to inform the boss about it, she looked at me with a weird expression before saying, "No, finish your work before leaving unless you want to get a week's worth of your pay cut." Frustrated, I turned to my desk and started moving my hands as fast as possible. After every 10 minutes, I tried calling her, but her phone was still turned off. I started wondering what it could be that she called me so many times. I managed to finish my work in the next 2 hours, and this time I didn't go to the boss to inform her about it. Instead, I headed directly to my car. After about half an hour, I reached our house, but I tried to open the door. I found it unlocked. An unsettling feeling formed in my stomach as I rushed inside to find her. As I searched for her everywhere, a sinking feeling lingered in my heart that I couldn't shake off. When I entered her bathroom, my heart stopped upon seeing her lying unconscious. I rushed to her side and started checking for her pulse, and it was a relief that she was still alive. I immediately picked her up and dashed to my car. After carefully placing her on the seat, I started the ignition and rushed to the hospital. Upon entering the lobby, I screamed for help, and 2 attendants rushed to my side. They placed her on a stretcher and headed to the emergency room while I anxiously followed them. Despite my wishes for her well-being, I was too late. Half an hour after admitting her, the doctors approached me with a saddened expression and informed me that she couldn't make it. I asked them what was the cause, but they said they didn't know either. Her heart stopped for some reason. It had to be a mistake. When I checked, she was alive, and there was no way I could accept that she was dead just like that. I begged the doctors to save her, but no matter how much I pleaded and cried in front of them, they all kept repeating the same sentence. "I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing we can do now."
This happened less than a month ago. I'm a petite female in my 20s. I'm currently living in Mexico to escape life, a little after postgrad in a city that is not known as a dangerous place. A lot of foreigners live here, and I haven't heard any safety concerns. I'm living with my cousin who works from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., but houses are in a pretty good area with a school, nice hotel, and Starbucks within walking distance. Just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was, the incident happened while my aunt was visiting us from Mexico City. She stayed home all day with me, while I usually studied or watched Netflix. On this day, I was planning to have a chill day since I had woken up at around 11:30 a.m. I was watching something on my computer when I started to hear some loud pounding, like someone was working on something with a hammer. This was around midday. I thought my aunt had let some repairman in to do some work. I was under the assumption my aunt was still in the house, so I wasn't too worried and continued to watch my show. The hard noise stopped, and I heard 2 male voices talking casually. This made me feel more confident that they were there to fix something. I get up from bed to fetch my phone, and I don't have any service plan down here to message my aunt on Facebook to see what's going on. I didn't get a reply from her, so I just took it as she was busy and go back to lying in bed to not thinking of anything of the noise. 5 minutes later, I hear footsteps coming up the door. Take in mind, I'm lying in bed with my back to the door. When the door opens, I see a man. He was a pretty normal-looking guy with facial hair and dressed rather cleanly. Like if you saw him in public, you wouldn't think anything negative about him. As soon as he saw me, he shut the door and went downstairs. Then I heard another huge noise that I led to realize was him slamming the front door shut. My room is first room above the stairs, so the first thought was that this repairman accidentally opened my door. I thought he was trying to get access to our patio. I was a little confused, but again, didn't think anything of the situation. I slowly walk downstairs calling my aunt's name, but I get no response. As soon as I make it down the stairs, I hear my aunt in a panicked voice saying that they robbed us. They took the TV. She forgot to lock the first iron door of the house, which made it easy for them to break into the second door. She said that when she was walking by from the store, she noticed someone by the house. She asked him what he wanted, and he said he was looking for a teacher, and he got into a car with the other man and left. She didn't notice the TV in their car or anything suspicious until she got to the house. She mentioned that someone had rang the doorbell before she left to go to the store. When she went to check, no one was there. She believed they'd been watching her and my cousin, so when they opened the bedroom door, they were caught off guard and dipped. It's really frightening to think what could have happened if they didn't get scared off by seeing me. The cops came and were then telling me that they often kidnap girls or rape them. I know I got lucky.
Have you ever experienced the feeling of drifting off to sleep on public transportation, only to awaken several stops beyond your intended destination? It's happened to me multiple times, but this one incident I had a few months ago has imprinted itself in my mind. My boss overworks me to the point where I feel like I work in a factory, not a company. By the time I finish work, my body and mind are so exhausted that I frequently find myself nodding off, whether it be a bus or a subway. I never imagined being in a dangerous situation until one evening. Oh, Portia, I told you a dozen times, why aren't you opening your email? Go through it and you will find the draft. It was the 4th time she called me in the past 20 minutes to ask the simplest thing. Whenever I talked to her, I always wondered why in the world he hired her as a secretary if I had to do most of her work. Why not just double my pay and let me handle it officially? It was way past my work time, and I was not only tired but frustrated as well. Who wouldn't be when they feel as underpaid as I was feeling then? I walked to the bus stop and waited for my bus to arrive, which took about 15 minutes. After boarding the bus, I went to sit in an empty window seat, and the moment I did, my phone started ringing. My sleep-deprived mind made me curse a little louder when I saw Portia's name on the screen, making the lady sitting in my front seat turn around and give me a weird look. After declining it and turning my phone off, I leaned on the seat. Trust me, the back of my head was throbbing. I was this close to handing in my resignation letter if I had to explain to her the way to find the draft one more time. I was so tired that I didn't even realize when I dozed off. As I jolted from my sleep, I turned around, groaning, to see a frustrated woman scolding her child for kicking the back of my seat. To my surprise, only 3 other passengers were on the bus besides the misbehaving child. This was unusual, as the bus was typically packed with commuters when I usually disembarked. Then I realized I had not simply missed my stop, but had unknowingly traveled several stops past it. I got off at the next stop to board a bus back to my place, only to discover that the vicinity was far more remote than I had initially anticipated. While waiting for my bus, I noticed a man approaching my direction leisurely, donning a trench coat. To take precautionary measures, I hastened to pull out my phone, switched it on, and placed 911 on speed dial in case the situation called for it. He strolled over to the corner of the stop, extracted his cell phone, and proceeded to peruse it. Given the late hour and the fact that we were in such a secluded area, I was gripped with fear and prayed for the bus to arrive soon. After about 10 minutes, I felt slightly at ease when he remained focused on his cell phone. However, my relief was short-lived as I saw another man approaching the bus stop. He was walking in an odd manner, which led me to assume that he might be drunk. As he drew closer, he stood right next to me, causing me to feel uneasy. I immediately distanced myself from him. It was at that moment that I became fully aware of my surroundings. I was standing in the middle of the bus stop with 2 men on either side. This realization made me feel even more scared than I already was. To calm myself, I kept checking the time to see how long it would take until the bus arrived. Unfortunately, it seemed like there were still a few minutes left, which only added to my worry. Suddenly, I sensed an intense gaze directed toward me, and it became evident that it was coming from the intoxicated man. I attempted to avoid eye contact, but could sense him moving closer. Despite my efforts, I could feel his grin fixed on me. I rechecked the time. but I felt his nose brushing against my hair before I could react. The sensation sent a shiver down my spine as he sniffed me. I hastily distanced myself from him, only to be pushed closer towards the other man. Overwhelmed, I felt a lump form in my throat as I addressed the drunken man. "Can you please stop this?" However, rather than ceasing, he leaned in closer with a disgusting grin on me. I was ready to dial 911 when I found a hand behind me reaching the man's throat. I turned as I realized it was from the man in the trench coat. He had a pissed expression on his face as he threw a punch to the drunk man's jaw. I heard him say, "How dare you?" along with something else I couldn't understand as he continued beating the living hell out of him for several minutes before leaving him unconscious. The bus arrived shortly afterward, and we both got in. He didn't say anything to me or even look in my direction as he headed to an empty seat at the back of the bus and resumed whatever he was doing on his phone. As for myself, I opted to sit in a seat closer to the front, though I couldn't shake off the fear and discomfort that had come with my alarming experience. I still felt a sense of security in his presence. 15 minutes later, I finally reached my destination and hastened towards my apartment complex, all while keeping an eye out for any potential threats. Fortunately, I made it back unscathed. As for my daily routine, I continued with it as usual, but with the added precaution of never dozing off in public transportation again. Though I never encountered the man in the trench coat again, I remain grateful for his help that day. There are people like that creepy man I encountered at the bus stop that makes you feel scared, unsafe, and skeptical towards others when you find yourself in a similar situation. And then there are people like the guy who helped me, who instills a sense of hope and restores your faith in humanity.
I said I'm not making it up. It's the truth. It really was her. I was trembling in fear from what I had seen, but no one was believing me. Okay, fine, we will believe you. But can you tell us from the start about what happened? The officer looked at me with an expression that said calm down. So I took a long sigh and started telling my story. 1 month after my relationship to Cindy was finished, I had started to look for other girls to keep my manhood occupied. Cindy was my ex-girlfriend. I loved her. One can even say that I was obsessed with her, but she started to cheat on me. Even though I never found any proof, but I was sure she was cheating, so I had to end it. After Cindy, I was single and desperately looking for someone to date, and that's when I saw this ad about a site where you could get gorgeous chicks who weren't looking for something serious. I instantly clicked over it, and after a few failed attempts, I finally got matched to a girl. She looked hell gorgeous and sexy. I instantly started to fantasize about her. Her name was Aurora. She texted me hello, and I replied. And then she immediately texted again saying, "I'm not looking for anything serious, so don't get any wrong ideas." I smiled from that. "No worries, I'm not looking for anything serious either," I replied. After that, we started talking regularly. She would always text me first saying something naughty, and it would always stir up excitement in me. She was total opposite of Cindy. While Cindy was a simple girl who had a bubbly personality, innocent, immature, and childishness, Aurora, on the other hand, was mature, confident, and a very charming girl who knew what she was doing. I had started to look forward to her next messages. One day, while we were having a conversation, the topic turned to our interests. I asked her about her interests, and she said, "I love having romantic moments in weird places, such as woods, cemeteries, etc. I fantasize about having sex in the cemetery." My whole body felt sparks from the excitement I got from her text. "I can make that come true. There's a cemetery near my house," I replied. There was no response for about 10 minutes, so I started to get nervous. And then I was relieved when she replied, "So, when should we meet?" I couldn't control my happiness and excitement, so I asked her to meet me the same night. We decided to meet after 8 p.m. She told me that I won't have to pick her up and that she will meet me directly at the cemetery. I was extremely excited, so I didn't even take notice of it, but I had forgotten to share the address to her. I went ahead and took a bath, and after that, I got ready to meet her. I reached at the cemetery an hour early and started to wait for her. The hour passed, and it was finally 8 p.m., but she didn't arrive yet. More time passed, and I was getting impatient and angrier. After a while, I checked the time, and it was 9:45 p.m. I thought I should leave, and as I was about to take off, someone tapped over my shoulder. I turned to see it was Aurora. She was wearing a sexy blue dress. It was the shortest possible, and just by looking at her, my anger instantly fades away. I asked her what took her so long, and she said that there was something urgent came up. Now, when I was looking at her up close, I thought she was a gorgeous girl. "Do you want a kiss?" she asked. "Don't you want to talk first? You just got here." I asked her to look a bit patient, even though I wasn't. "Screw talking, so shut up and close your eyes." As she said that, I immediately listened to her command and closed my eyes. I felt her lips smashing over mine, and we started to have a passionate kiss. That's when I had this sudden urge to look at her face while kissing and open my eyes. My eyes met with a red eyes whose which blood was coming out. I pulled myself from her and screamed from anger. "Don't you want to have sex, honey?" Aurora's face had turned from beautiful to this horror. She looked like a rotten corpse, damaged dry lips, blood dripping from one eye. Her hand was broken, and I could recognize this face anywhere. It was Cindy. I started to run in order to get out from there, but she suddenly appeared in front of me. I fell down and started to crawl backwards. "Please don't hurt me, Cindy," I screamed. My entire body was trembling from fear. I somehow managed to get up and started to run toward the police station while screaming. Surprisingly, she didn't follow me. As soon as I reached there, I screamed, "I saw Cindy in the cemetery." Everyone turned towards me. I was panicking and screaming that I had seen Cindy, but no one was believing me. "But Cindy ran away from home. How can you see her as a ghost in that cemetery?" As my story finished, the officer asked me. "It's because I'm the one who killed her and buried her there." I was scared as hell and frustrated that nobody was believing anything I said, so I shouted. Everyone went quiet, and then that officer looked at me and said in a calm tone, "What are you talking about? You killed her? How?" "I will confess everything. Just save me from her. Otherwise she will kill me," I screamed. I couldn't stop panicking. I told them that day Cindy came over to my house that day and we were having an argument. I was saying that I know she is cheating on me, but she kept denying and lying. So in anger, I started to throw things on her. That's when I threw a knife without noticing and pierced through her left eye. I started to panic, and in order to cover it, I killed her and took her body in night to the cemetery and buried her there. I guess he was feeling guilty and started having delusions after killing Cindy, a man whispered in the officer's ears, which I could clearly hear. "I'm not delusional. I'm not mad. I know what I saw. You have to save me from her. She will kill me." I kept shouting while they dragged me forcefully towards the cell. Remember the excitement you felt when you moved to the new house, the new opportunities that would open up, and all the new friends that you would make, and the new places that you get to be in. My family moved to this really old town in Arkansas in 2004. I guess my family was down on money, and this town somehow was the savior for Father, as he inherited my aunt's property. All of it. And there was a big house that he inherited too. So when we moved to that house, and it was more like mansion. Now it wasn't a new house, it was built at least a century ago. But to us, it was our new house. The new house in Arkansas, as I recall this adventure, I was someone who was born in the fast-paced New York, and then the shift brought me to such a drastic halt that it was unbearable for me in the beginning. I was a city boy, and I was suddenly in a place that was slower than what I had been used to, so finding a balance was something that was important to me. My school was from a bike distance, and I didn't know anyone there, so going there on my own was something I wasn't into. As I got to the place, I saw kids turning their heads and looking at me, and probably judging as to who this new kid was. It was almost as if everyone knew everyone there, and I was someone new, and obviously some thought it might be best to try and bully the new kid. Well, I might have been from a city, but I wasn't one of those soft city boys that cannot defend themselves. A tall student probably held back, moved closer, and said, "Hey, new kid, you got any lunch money?" And I said, "I have lunch money, but it's not for you." He was big, and certainly it seemed that my comment made him angry. He tried grabbing me, and I held his hand and punched him right in the gut. I must have been smaller than him, but there was no way he was going to get an up on me. It was his mistake to underestimate me, but then the whole class had the idea that I wasn't the guy to be messed with. My first impression at that school was that I am not the one to be messed with. It was the first day, and I was in detention. They told me to call my parents, but since they were not really back, so I had to stay back at the school. While coming back from the detention, I saw one of the guys had gathered around the backyard where my bike was parked, and it was the same guy I beat the crap out of. He was out there with his friends, and for what I know, he was probably there for beating me. He and his boys were waiting to just bash me. I saw it from the distance, and I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to involve in that. I was tough, but I wasn't going to mess up with so many people. They would mess me up. So I stayed down, knowing that it was best for me, and it was definitely not wise to mess with 4 people. I tried circling back, and they thought, but they made me when I was trying to sneak and decided to follow. I saw one of them. They had the knife in his hand, and it was really something different. I guess people here were really off the chart. The psychos of the school were after me with the knife in his hand. I bet all he could think was stab me real good. I was making sure that it didn't happen, so I was pedaling as fast as I could. I wasn't going to stop. I decided to keep moving, and I kept moving, knowing that these kids would not stop hunting me. I soon was in the front of my new house, and I quickly opened it up and got inside. There was no one in there, and I had to wait, hoping that someone would arrive, but I don't think anyone was arriving. I locked the door and shut myself in, but the bastards knew where I lived now, and there was this feeling that they will not let go. It turns out they didn't. Next morning, when I was getting ready for the school, they stood out of my house on their bikes and they signaled me as they passed by my house. Somehow that day I stayed at home, but I knew I had to get on with it someday. So as I got out of my door knowing what is coming, I set out to go to the market in the evening, and I already had a plan in action. I saw that they were all standing right outside my house, and I knew it was my time to get beat up. But instead, I invited them in. If there was a way to avoid the beating, it was by my plan. I invited them in, and they expected, and the guy said, "This doesn't mean you are not going to get beat up. We'll just do it inside." I knew what I was doing. I brought them in, knowing what is in store for them. It was they had no idea what they were getting involved in, and I made sure that they never would. They entered, and the first thing they saw was a hand just lying there with blood coming out of the corner. They were freaked, but they were not completely aware of what I had set them up for. And soon, there was another hand, and some fingers of a different hand just lying on the floor. The whole house was giving them the creepy vibes. And then a man came out running with a hand on his throat, and what looked like blood was oozing out of the veins of his neck, and he screamed, "Help me! Help me!" And he ran out the door, freaking every single one of those boys. And then I said, "What do you guys want to talk about?" And as I asked this, I took one of the fingers and started using it as a tool to clear my eye. And I bet they were spooked, since nobody said anything. They just ran, as far and as fast as they could. I kept all of my mother's film prosthetics away, and then along with Ramirez, the guy who acted out the slit throat, cleared the mess. I messed up those guys good. But good thing is, through time, I have formed a friendship with everyone. And when the first day I told them the story of how I fooled them, they were all embarrassed. But most importantly, it helped me be friends. Now I am quite fond of the people of my small, irrelevant town.
No movie will ever compare to the hell that I've gone through the last year. The ordeal seems like it's been one long waking nightmare. It all began normally enough. I just recently got out of a long-term relationship and wasn't looking for anything serious. I figured that I'd give Tinder a shot. It didn't take long for me to get a few matches. I chose the hottest one and we agreed to meet a week later. The date went so well that we decided to do it again, and this became a regular thing until the fourth date. It was beginning to look as if it may grow into something more in spite of my original intentions. As the fourth date wrapped up, I invited her back to my place for a drink. She agreed and things soon got hot and heavy, as they say. We were mere seconds away from taking things all the way when she broke down. I was confused. I'm not an aggressive partner and her behavior up to that point had been very receptive. I asked what was wrong and she said that she had been assaulted by a previous boyfriend. It had been several years and she thought that she had moved past it. I felt bad for her, yet still kind of frustrated, and she got up and dressed quickly. I'll admit it was, like I said, frustrating, but there was little I could do, and I understood where she was coming from. I called her an Uber and she left me with a difficult decision to make. After a long, sleepless night, I decided to just kind of end things there. Some of you reading this may call me cruel, but I couldn't really see another option. Things appeared to just be at an impasse, you know? I wasn't going to wait around until she determined that she was ready, and I sure wasn't going to pressure her into anything, obviously. I told myself that it was for the best. I'd never wanted to jump right into another relationship so quickly. That wouldn't benefit either of us, and I broke things off as kindly as I could. That night never came up. I stressed how I'd felt I'd rushed into things too quickly, and naturally she was a bit upset, but gave no indication of actually being angry. I wished her a happy future and just bid her a goodbye. And normally, that's where it would have ended. I took a month off from dating and Tinder and all that, and when I came back, I matched with a beautiful graduate student just looking to have a good time. This is more of what I was looking for. We met for drinks and hit it off. I went home happy with a spring in my step and a gleam in my eyes, they say. And maybe 2 days passed when I got a call from a neighbor. He informed me that there were leaflets posted all around our neighborhood, calling me an attempted predator. I thought this was his idea of some sick joke, and definitely not a good one. I laughed, but he assured me that this wasn't a laughing matter. I demanded proof, and a few minutes later he came to my door with a bright yellow piece of paper, and it claimed the following. On the night of Friday, November 19th, 2021, I was invited on a dinner date with Mr. My Name. After being plied with many glasses of wine, I was pressured into joining him at his home. Although I was clearly unable to consent, Mr. My Name attempted to coax me into his bed. When I refused his advances, he became enraged and threw me onto the street in the middle of the night. Please make sure all your female friends are made aware of the danger they may face by dating this manipulative monster. I can't begin to describe the anger that I felt in that moment. It was made worse when the neighbor asked me if it was true. Of course it wasn't, but when someone asks that type of question, it's a good indication that they believe it. Rather than strangle him, I did my best to assure him it was not. And his reception was less than convincing, but I had more pressing problems at that second. I had to get all those flyers, or whatever you call them, before any more impressionable idiots saw them. I spent most of the day pulling them from light poles and bulletin boards all over town. I'm still not sure if I got them all, and I counted over 200 when all was said and done. Then, out of nowhere, I discovered that I had been banned from Tinder after someone filed a complaint against me. My life felt like it was spiraling out of control, and I was desperate to stop it any way I could. What came next was probably the biggest mistake I'd made during this entire ordeal. I worked myself into such a muddle I did the one thing I shouldn't have. I contacted her via text message to confront her. She promised to retract her claims if I agreed to meet her face to face, and I took the bait like a sucker and drove to her house. We sat down at her kitchen table where she explained how hurt she felt. I wasn't interested in hearing any of it, but I was willing to suffer to save my good name. While she did so, she kept a glass of wine close at hand. She had clearly been drinking even before I arrived. After an hour, everything appeared to be handled. As I prepared to leave, she began coming on to me, and I mean in a very obvious manner, and I almost gave in, but then I remembered our previous problem and I shut her down. She was not pleased. She hissed and walked off toward the kitchen. I figured that she was getting some more wine, and it seemed like a great time to sneak away. I was putting on my jacket when a crash came from the kitchen. I hurried in to see what the matter was and was met by a shrill screeching. She rushed towards me with the stem of a broken wine glass and stabbed me with it. She retracted the jagged stem from the wound and snarled like some freaking animal. I was in shock, and I froze for a brief moment, unsure of how to react. Then she lunged at me again, just missing, and I took off. She pursued me out to my car and pounded on it as I sped off, and I just drove straight to the hospital, calling 911 as I drove. I informed the dispatcher which hospital I could be found at if the police needed to speak to me, and sure enough, an officer arrived as I was being treated for my injury. Luckily for me, she hadn't hit any major arteries or organs or anything like that, and the cop let me know that my assailant had been arrested, but what came next was a complete surprise. I was shocked to learn that she had a previous conviction for stalking and assault, and I surmised that it was a similar situation. Monday came around, and despite what I had hoped, my attacker was given bail. She paid and was out in time for dinner. I was furious and gave the assistant DA a piece of my mind, and while I waited for the trial day to arrive, I remained in a constant state of fear. I could swear that I saw her once or twice over that period, but I was in such a frazzled state that it was possibly my imagination. She became all I thought about. My work suffered. Even in my dreams, she often took center stage. She refused several plea deals and insisted the jury would acquit her. I know it was all a stall tactic, and she was assembling all the elements that she would need to what I thought would be to disappear. And the first rumblings began during jury selection. She had not been present for the procedure. Although she wasn't required to be, it didn't bode well. Then when the trial began in earnest, her lawyer was finally forced to admit that he had lost contact with his client several weeks prior. Now today is October 28th as I write this, and she's been missing almost 2 months. I sit around wondering what my future may hold. Hopefully she's done the wise thing and is currently laying low halfway around the world, or something. On the surface, that appears to be the case. Yet for some reason, I'm not totally convinced. My former love interest is a highly successful and intelligent woman. It's largely what drew her to me from the beginning. I have a creeping suspicion that she may be focusing her vast resources into getting back at me. Whatever form that may take, I'm not really sure. Naturally, I fear she'll go to the conventional route and just end my life, likely by her own hand, maybe another stabbing. However, she is more than capable to go even further and extend my suffering indefinitely. And this is why I'm going to all the trouble to post my side of the story. I'm well aware I probably come off as a jerk in some circumstances, but I don't care. I just want a record of the truth to be available publicly should I disappear. My lawyer also has a copy in case I'm no longer around to testify on my own behalf. It's doubtless that law enforcement will eventually catch up with her at some point. I'm concerned it will be too late for me, though. So if you learn of the death or a disappearance of some unknown New York State attorney through the media, please remember what you read here.
Believe me or not, but coming from a family who has a long history of being exorcist, I have got a strange ability. It allows me to see the ghosts who have possessed someone or are trying to do so. But what is even stranger is that this weird cursed ability only works on Mondays. I know, Most of you think that people like us are scammers or something because of real scammers who taint our reputation, but not all exorcists are scamming others. My name is Gina Blair, and I'm a 16-year-old girl who has exorcist blood earning. Someone with an ability like me is born once in 3 decades, and whenever they are born, either they die at birth or survive only a few years. That was the reason I was so precious to my family. It might occur to you that since I had training since birth and have such ability, I might be a strong and brave girl who is always ready to fight an exorcism. But I'm not. I'm just as cowardly as others if they were to face a ghost like me, because every time I see one, I'm terrified to the extent of passing out. That is the reason I made my parents enroll me in school just like the rest of normal students, and it was my first day there. Just like others, I was to stay in a dorm, but my father sent my Aunt Dana, who was also my age, along with me. Unfortunately for me, my bad luck followed me to school, and the first day of my school life was Monday. The moment I stepped foot on the campus, I bumped into a guy, but I got this weird vibe, but I was sure that there was no ghost on him. It was so weird that I kept staring at him for a few moments. "Isn't it too early to have a crush on someone?" Aunt Jenna said while laughing as I watched him walk away. "I'm not having a crush, Jenna. It's just there is something weird about that guy. I just can't put my finger on it," I said, which made Aunt Jenna stare at him too. "Is there a ghost in action?" she asked. "No, I don't think so," I replied. After watching the boy disappear from our sight, we went to the class. Being paranoid on this day was a given, and whomever I looked at, I kept thinking about what I might see the next minute. My entire day went in paranoia and nervousness, so to sum it all up, I could not focus on any of my classes. "Hi, you must be the new girl. I'm Susan, and I'm a year senior to you." A cheerful-looking girl came to me while introducing herself. "Oh, hi, I'm Jenna, and this is my niece Gina." Since I wasn't much of a talker, Aunt Jenna went ahead and engaged in the conversation with her. As she was talking to Susan, I noticed the same guy from this morning staring in our direction. The moment my eyes met his, he turned around and walked away. The next few days were quiet. I did my best to fit in and get along with the other students, while Aunt Jenna had no problem making friends, which made me a bit jealous of her, but I overcame that emotion. Susan started to hang out with my aunt and me, which made me open up to her little by little as well. "Hey Gina, have you guys seen Susan anywhere? I can't seem to find it since yesterday." It was Susan's best friend, and that is when I recalled that I haven't seen her either after Friday's lunch break. "No, we haven't," Aunt replied. The same day, as we were walking from the lab to the classroom, I saw the same guy, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw Susan's spirit lurking over his shoulder and then disappeared. I thought of telling Aunt, but thinking I might be imagining things, I didn't. That very evening in the dorm, when Aunt Jenna had gone out with some other girls, I saw another ghost of an unfamiliar girl. She seemed harmless, but it looked like she was searching for something. The only ghosts I was able to see were those who were either trying to possess someone or they already had. Just then, I received a phone call from Aunt Jenna, and as I answered her, it sounded like she was whispering. "Gina, is Stacy in the dorm?" "No, didn't she go with you guys?" I replied in confusion. "Yes, but we can't seem to find her, and I think I'm in trouble because someone had been following me." After telling me this, she shared her live location and disconnected the call. I know she must be hoping that I inform the cops, but even I don't know why I decided to go there on my own. As I was getting close to the place, I could not help but feel this weird, familiar feeling, and that is when I saw the same guy I bumped into on my first day on campus. That unpleasant feeling kept getting stronger and stronger, so I sneaked around to see what he was up to. He entered an abandoned building, and I followed him in. That is when I saw Aunt Jenna and Stacy tied near a pole. Stacy's stomach was cut open, and she was bleeding while Aunt seemed fine and unconscious. My eyes lingered on the ceiling, and I was shocked to see multiple ghosts, including Susan's, lingering atop the guy who was looking at the two girls with a monstrous smile. You know what? Ghosts are frightening. They are terrifying. But what's even more terrifying than them are the people like this guy who has not an ounce of humanity in them. The reason I was extremely terrified for my life at this moment was that whenever I faced a ghost, I knew they were already dead and they won't be able to kill me. But as I was watching this guy take his sweet time tearing Susan limb from limb, I knew that my ability, my exorcist powers, were useless because there was no way anyone could remove the monster from this man. I dialed 911 with trembling hands and informed them about the situation. Luckily for me, the guy was so busy enjoying his brutality, he did not seem to notice me. He snapped back to reality the moment he noticed cops coming in, but it was too late for him to run. As he was getting arrested, I quickly went and untied Aunt Jenna to free her. I was shaking like a leaf the entire time as I helped her come to her senses and took her back to the dorm. A few days later, we were informed about the guy. His name was Carlos Simon. He was sent to a rehabilitation center when he was young for attacking an elderly woman. After his return from the place, he stayed quiet, but teenagers started to disappear one by one. In his confession, he told the cops that killing them calmed his nerves and satisfied him, which made me tremble and terrified. All I could think about after listening to all of this was that he was a soulless and emotionless monster. There was an unimaginable terror of humans that had placed the horror of ghosts in my heart now, and I couldn't help but be wary of those around me.
Back in 2015, I went to Cologne, Germany for a work trip. I put it in quotes because it was all on the company dime, but all it consisted of were a bunch of team-building exercises involving several different offices from around Europe and the US. There'd be go-karting, paintballing, numerous lunch meets, and nights on the town. So although we were there in a professional capacity, it was basically a paid vacation. I was honestly super psyched to be there. It was my first time outside of the US, let alone Europe. So our first night there, I went out with a work buddy of mine, hitting up a few small bars after dinner to sample some German beers. And I do mean sample because, despite what everyone said afterwards, we knew darn well that we couldn't get sauced since we had our first team-building activity the following morning. So we're drinking smaller glasses of all the different beers in one place, then moving on to the other. These glasses couldn't have been any bigger than 8 ounces or so, and we weren't totally finishing everything. I know it sounds dumb, but even though we were drinking, the aim was to not get drunk. My point is, by the time we got to our third bar, we were basically sober and had told ourselves that that'd be our last stop before returning to our hotel. We walked up to the bar, checked out the drinks menu, then ordered 2 small glasses of Fruity, which turned out to be a bright red strawberry beer. Then as we're talking about how awesome it was, some guy sidles up to us like, "Americans?" We get talking to him just about where we're from and stuff, and it turned out he wasn't German, but had moved there from someplace else when he was a kid. I didn't want to press him on it, as the way he talked made it seem like kind of a touchy subject, so we just moved on to other stuff, like why we were visiting Cologne. It's around then that he started asking if we wanted him to hook us up with any girls. I knew exactly what he meant by that, so I politely refused on mine and my buddy's behalf, laughing it off and assuring him I was married. He moved on to drugs, asking if we wanted hashish or cocaine or ecstasy. Again, I'm like, no thanks, remaining polite. But then the guy kind of pauses, looks us both over, and asks me something that shook me to my core. He leans in so the other drinkers wouldn't hear him, and he says in a low voice, "It's boys you want, yes? I can get you boys. Very young boys." My buddy was in a mid-sip as the guy said it, and he just about chokes on his Fruity as I tell the guy to take a hike. I didn't think he was serious. I thought it was more supposed to come across as an insult or something, but afterwards, I'm not so sure. I think as horrifying as it may seem, he might have actually been able to follow through with that offer. Anyway, like I said, I just told the guy to go kick rocks since he was getting on my nerves. The guy kind of sneers at us, laughs the rebuke off, then walks away, taking a seat with a bunch of guys over in the corner of the bar. Me and my buddy work through our beers, siphon the pythons in the bar's bathroom, then head back towards our hotel room. On the way out, the guys in the corner of the bar are giving us major stink eye. But with me being semi-street smart, I just knew to stick to brightly lit places and try to shake their tail if they tried to follow us. We walk for a few minutes, no one follows us, so I think we're all good. But it's shortly after that I realized I was actually really drunk. Made sense, I know, I'd been drinking, but I was too drunk. Like way too drunk for the amount I'd actually consumed. Literally the last thing I remember is saying, "Bro, I feel gross." Then there's just nothing. I know we kept walking for a while, but I don't remember where, and I don't remember passing out or seeing those shady guys from the bar again. But given that both me and Buddy woke up a few hours later, just as the sun was starting to rise, and he had been completely rinsed clean of all valuables, I'm willing to hazard a guess as to what happened. All the symptoms we felt the next day were completely consistent with being drugged with GHB or some other kind of sedative. When we reported it to the cops, they had us give urine samples and tested our urine, and lo and behold, they tested positive for some kind of knockout drug. It wasn't specifically GHB, but it was some other long 3-word name, but it basically had the same effect, and we both felt absolutely terrible for the next whole day. Honestly, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Like, I know it could have been so much worse, especially if those dudes were as shady as I think they were. But that's just it. I think what they did was kind of a warning, like a, this is what we're capable of kind of thing. How did they manage to slip something into our drinks? I have zero clue. It must have been when he cleaned it, but I didn't see a thing. It certainly makes for some impressive sleight of hand, and certainly makes it clear that whoever we're dealing with, they were pros. Heck, if they'd really wanted to, they probably could have made us completely disappear. We missed that first team building exercise in the morning of the second full day. Go-karting too, which really stunk knowing that we wouldn't be going again. But we had bigger fish to fry. Ultra-dangerous criminal fish too. But no matter how detailed of a report we gave or how much we pointed the German cops in the right direction, they came back with nothing. I think the closest we got to a definitive answer was when one cop said that he strongly suspected it being the work of an Albanian group that were known to scam tourists. As soon as the guy said it, both me and my buddy were like, yeah, that sounds about right. The shady guy did say that he was from another country, and his unwillingness to talk about it could have been genuine. I know all the ex-Yugoslav countries went to some terrible times in the early 90s, which could well explain why the guy was in Cologne in the first place. Thankfully, we never ran into those guys again, and the rest of the trip was so much fun it pretty much made up for the initial drugging and robbery. But I always let it serve as a reminder that not everyone in a foreign place is some kindly stranger, and letting your guard down in a new and unfamiliar place can come with a heavy, heavy price. After about a year of using the dating app Hinge, I'd pretty much worked through every girl on there. I'm not saying I had much success, but since my preferences were kind of narrow, there weren't all that many potential matches for me. I'd check Hinge every so often to see if there were any new faces, but the vast majority were girls I'd seen before, having deleted their accounts before making new ones, and any actual new faces just didn't seem to do it for me. That's when Coraline appeared in my Discover section. Her name wasn't actually Coraline, but since this story does get kind of personal, I'm going to change some names to protect the innocent. Every so often I'd see a girl on Hinge that'd provoke an audible wow from me. Coraline, or Coral for short, was one of them. At the risk of sounding a little ignorant, when I first saw her, I thought she might be like half Asian or something, but it turned out that she had some indigenous Mexican blood in her, and her grandma was from the native Nawa tribe. The point was, she had this unusual but undeniably attractive look about her, and with her dip-dyed shoulder-length hair, I found myself instantly captivated. But as I scrolled down, I saw one of her prompts said, "You should know, I was in a car accident and I have some neurological disabilities and scarring as a result." That kind of came out of left field for me, and I found myself confronted with what I suppose is my own bias. I was so game to ask this girl out, but I honestly hesitated when I read the thing about her disabilities. And I mean, why? She's gorgeous, smart, obviously super active if half her pictures are in climbing and workout gear. And from what I could tell, the fact that she continued to date after an accident like that made her extremely brave from where I'm standing. I'm honestly not sure I'd have the same kind of balls to bounce back after something that nearly killed me. That was what swung it. That and the idea that passing on a girl I'd normally swoon over just because she had some deformities, I think that's a bit of a jerk move on my end, I'm sure you'll agree. So, I sent her a message, and I did what I usually do and just hope for the best. After a few days later, we match, and the fact that I was so elated about it told me how much it actually mattered to me that she had some differences. I was excited to talk to a charismatic, brave, and beautiful young woman whose attitude towards her own adversity was frankly inspiring for me. At first, we talked about literature and traveling, and by the time she used the word petrichor in a sentence, petrichor is the earthly scent produced when rain falls on dry soil, I was practically throwing my phone number at her. And luckily for me, she was actually keen on continuing the conversation. Texting and voice notes soon progressed to organizing a first date, and we met for coffee and donuts one rainy afternoon, fixing all of the world's problems over the course of like a 3-hour conversation. I didn't even try to broach the subject of her accident. I figured that she'd talk about it if or when she was ready. But as she said, she had this policy of fail fast, and if I couldn't deal with her disabilities, there was no point pursuing anything. She showed me some of the scarring in her hairline and some of the scarring on her shoulder too. The accident had left her unable to lift her left arm above her shoulder height, but perhaps the thing that had the biggest impact on her life was the night terrors. Coral mentioned how she'd gotten her panic attacks under control with therapy and medication, but that residual fear seemed to have just confided itself to the nighttime. She said it was one of the biggest things that held her back from getting back to dating after the accident, and she'd often worried she'd have an attack of night terrors after being intimate with somebody. I'll be honest, I kind of worried about that too. Not so much because it would freak me out. I totally get why she had nightmares after a major car accident, but she was terrified of embarrassing herself, as she put it. So, I did something entirely against my instincts, and waited like 2 months to try and seal the deal, so to speak. I waited until I was entirely sure she was comfortable around me, sleeping in the same bed and all that stuff, and only then did I invite her back to my place to make the next move. I promise I won't go into any unnecessary detail, but it was wonderful, and even with the scarring she hated so much, she was beautiful. And as we fell asleep in each other's arms, I started to wonder, what was I so worried about in the first place? I wake up in the middle of the night, roll over to check my phone, and it's about 3 a.m. It's perfectly quiet, so Coral hasn't had night terrors or whatever, so my first thought is like, she's comfy and asleep. Awesome. I roll back to try and spoon Coral a little and find that there's no one there. I figured she's just in the bathroom or whatever. I have an ensuite. But there's no lights on and no noise coming from it. I check the floor next to the side of the bed where she's tossed some of her clothes, and they're gone. And only then, in my half-sleep, half-drunken state, do I realize she's bailed while I was asleep. I mean, it hurt. I'd never had a girl get up and leave in the middle of the night like that, but before I even had time to process it, I heard the front door of my apartment rattling. So, little side note, I live in this really terrible Brooklyn apartment at the time, one where the door wouldn't stay shut unless you actually locked it from the inside. So, unlike other places, where that kind of sound would indicate someone was outside wanting to get in, I realized that it might well be Coral making noise as she's trying to get out. I didn't think she was having a night terror, or like some kind of episode. I have no idea what to make of anything, and I'm still half asleep and incredibly confused. So, it was with a fair amount of nerves and caution that I edged around my bedroom and into the main hallway to see what was going on with that door. And just like I'd deduced in the final moments before I left my bedroom, it was indeed Coral, trying to get out of my apartment, probably confused and scared as to why the door was locked. I was sure that I'd mentioned something about it to her and that my keys lived in a teeny little holder by the door that looked like a little cuckoo clock. You wouldn't know it could open unless someone tells you. But then again, coming back home a little tipsy after our meal might have meant it slipped my mind entirely. Coral? Are you okay? I asked her. She just span around to face me, and it was only then that I realized that she had a corkscrew in her hand, and she's holding it almost like a pair of brass knuckles, with the screw emerging from between her fingers.
Who are you?
She screams at me.
Why is the door locked? Let me out of here before I call the cops.
I realized right then that she was having some kind of episode. She'd had a night terror, forgotten where she was or something, and now she was freaking out. It was scary, sure, but at least I knew what was happening, and after having talked about it a little, I knew exactly what I had to do.
Coraline, it's me. You came here after some food, we slept together. You're safe, I promise. I'm sorry about my door. I have to lock it like that, but you're free to leave if you want to. You need to calm down. Please.
I tried to get it all out at once, all while staying calm enough to bring her down from the brink.
Open the door before I kill you.
Having anyone lunge at you with a corkscrew is intimidating. It really doesn't matter if they're 5'0" incredibly skinny, but have someone lunge at you with a corkscrew when you're completely naked? That's real fear, let me tell you.
Coraline?
I started talking really slow.
I can't open the door without the key. I need to get the key.
That's when she approaches even further and pushes the sharp point of the corkscrew into my neck. Not hard enough to actually puncture my throat, but oh my god, one smidgen of force more and I'd have been squirting blood like a Kill Bill henchman. There came a moment when I was sure she was about to plunge that piece of cold steel into my neck. She took this sharp inhale and kind of flexed her arm. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I remember my heart just pounding in my chest as I'm thinking the next thing I'd be doing would be rushing to call 911. But right as she seems like she's about to stab me with a freaking corkscrew, she relents, and I can see this look enter her eyes as she sort of, and this is the best way I can describe it, wakes up. She sees the corkscrew at my neck and just drops it, recoiling like she was horrified at what she was doing. She looks me dead in the eye and stammers out,
I'm sorry,
And then her speech just degenerated into silent, gasping tears. My heart absolutely broke for her in that moment. The big thing she'd feared about getting back into dating, it had happened, and it was probably worse than either of us had imagined it would be. It was dawn by the time she calmed down, and as much as I insisted that she was free to leave, I wanted her to stay. I wanted to be supportive. I hated the idea of making her feel like I was mothering her or whatever, but at the same time, I just wanted to protect her and help her so bad. Not the healthiest inclination when it comes to relationships, but it is what it is, I suppose. I'd like to give you some kind of super happy ending here too, but my relationship with Coral didn't last. She just didn't feel like she was quite ready to date yet, and rushing it had made her feel worse than ever. That sucked to hear. It sucked hard.
And as that dumb old cliche goes, if you love something, let it go. I still think about her from time to time, and I hope she's doing much better than she was. And Coral, if by some small possibility you're reading this, and you recognize that this is about you, I love you, and I forgive you.
It was around the time when I went on a trip with my family at Kathmandu, Nepal, one of the southern Asian countries. Despite being in our neighboring country, I never knew much about their cultures and people, and that was my first visit ever. The first thing we did upon reaching and checking into our hotel was to get plenty of sleep, since our entire body felt sore from all the traveling. We did wake up once, that was to have, but after that, we went back to sleep. The next morning, Mom woke up earlier than usual, and we headed to the nearest restaurant for breakfast. The plan was to visit Pashupatinath Temple first, but since it was to open at 10 and we were 2 hours early, we decided to walk around in the nearby park. We still got to the temple pretty early and spent our time there till lunch. We were only able to visit 2 places on the first day. The second one was Garden of Dreams. Anyway, for the rest of the week, we were able to visit Buddha Stupa, Hanuman Doka, Talabatwajani Temple, and Patandarba Square. We couldn't even catch our entire week just went like that, and the next day we were back to flying to India. I had a girlfriend named Pooja, so I wanted to buy a souvenir for her, but I was unable to do that with all my family members hanging out together. But since it was the last night here, I didn't want it to go to waste. There was a market a few meters distance from the hotel, so I told my parents that I was going to buy something for my friend and headed outside without hearing their response, because I knew they would want to either tag themselves or send a sibling along. Upon reaching the market, I immediately started looking around stalls and shops for something she would love, but no matter how much I looked, I couldn't seem to find anything that would suit her taste. So I went ahead a bit and kept looking until I realized I'd gotten lost. Yeah, grown-ass man being lost in a market. Something to laugh about, right? I thought so too at the moment, though I thought I'd be able to find my way back if I traced my steps to the hotel. But thinking that was even worse idea since I'd moved from stall to stall, I didn't even notice which way I was going and which turn I was taking. All the stalls, and not to offend anyone, but the shopkeepers looked similar to me, which must be because it was my first time seeing them. The more I traced it back, the more I felt lost. That was when the market ended, and I had a feeling that I was going in the right direction, so I kept doing that. But I guess it was not just me who took notice of me getting lost. I turned around to see who was following me, but I couldn't tell between the crowds. I started walking with long and fast steps and feeble attempts to lose the person behind me. But that led me to a place with many alleys. I had seen such alleys back in India as well, but I never had to think about getting lost since I knew where each of them would lead. And even if I was new to any of them, I would always find my way somehow. That doesn't seem to be the case here, since I had no idea which one to take, and there was no option to take a risk looking at how I had possible robbers or murderers on my trail. As I was trying to look around the way back, I saw a guy around the age of 40. His height must be around 5 feet 6 inches, and looking at how I was 6 foot something, I could take him down easily. But I knew better than to judge someone by their appearance, especially in a place far from home. At first, I didn't know for sure if this was the man who had been following me since the market, but when even after taking a few turns, I could still see him walking behind me, I was sure that he was the guy. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't know much about Nepal, so I have no idea if the alleys and streets ahead of me were safe or not. I was having a constant fear of someone jumping out from nowhere and stabbing me just so he could rob me. At that point, I started to regret rushing out without bringing someone with me. Things started to get weirder when I noticed the man's eyes constantly glued on me, and his lips forming a faint smile as if he was enjoying the chase. I turned back my head looking ahead of me and speeding up even more. For some reason, I could feel that I had been passing through the same alleys again and again, except I couldn't find my way out. I felt his speed increase along with mine, and this time he said something in Nepali, but I couldn't understand what he was saying except the part that said hi. That was when my phone's ringtone started ringing. I couldn't believe I was so frightened that I'd completely forgotten about the phone in my pocket. I answered it,
And from the other side, my father's loud voice met my ears, asking me in anger where I was and why I was taking so long. "I'm lost," I said in a slow, hesitant voice. And this time, I was met with silence from the other end. "And someone is following me for about an hour now," I said again. "And instead of getting angry or scolding me, send me the location, I'll be there," he said in a calm voice. "I think I've gotten too far from the hotel. Why don't you show the hotel's location? I'll find a way." I was again met with silence, but after a few seconds he responded with, and then the very same minute, live location was sent to my phone. The man was still following me, but I followed the route this time, and within a few moments, I was standing in front of the hotel where I found my entire family standing outside waiting for me. Worry was written all over their faces. I turned back to see the man wasn't there anymore, so I went back to the hotel room with them. Now, don't think for a second that I didn't get a scolding later on. It's not just my father who scolded me. My mother and both of my siblings kept scolding me back to India. But despite all that, I'm thankful to God that I was able to make it back safe to them. Otherwise, only God knows what could have become of me now.
I live in a city with a public transportation system. They've been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays, during business hours, the public transit operator will order a lift for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up or if they're short a driver. Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a lift, and this nice older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he started to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intentioned. Told him I'm not married and that I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work and go home and spend my time with family. He then says, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." Again, I'm just thinking that he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me off at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things that I needed for work. When we stopped, he said he was joking, that he's married and has a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone, so I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning he texted me and asked if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that and that I was sure my bus was running. He said it would be his pleasure and that he'd pick me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then about an hour later he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said, "Okay, see you at 3. He shows up right at 3 and lets me know that he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I open the door and he's starting to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says that he has a confession. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before and that he'd love to spend time with me and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent a day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but know that when you're in a situation like that with the predator, playing nice is sometimes safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said, "See you tomorrow." That evening at work, I checked my phone after a bust happy hour and he's texted me a couple of times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said that he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Thursday morning, I'm out running errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I asked him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me and telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying to please stop. Now Friday morning is where stuff hit the fan. He tells me he loves me no matter what. He said I told my wife about you and that I'm in love with you and I want a divorce. I told him to please don't do that and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault. They were drifting apart anyways. Then he said I'm picking up for dinner at 5:30 and I'm not taking no for an answer. I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. At around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and even begs to come pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but I was just too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to make a report through Lyft, so I did. And I haven't heard anything since then, but honestly, that was one of the most threatening and creepy moments of my life. I've also attached the doorbell footage so you can get an idea of what he's like. From the mid-1980s to the early 1990s, the rural South Korean city of Hwaseong was terrorized by a merciless and predatory serial killer. Between September of 1986 and April of 1991, a total of 15 women and girls were found bound, gagged, violated, and in most cases, strangled to death with an item of their own clothing, usually their socks, underwear, or pantyhose. The murders prompted the largest criminal investigation in South Korean history, with over 20 million man-hours spent poring over witness statements, analyzing crime scenes, and interviewing over 21,000 suspected culprits. The nightmare began on September 15th of 1986, when a 71-year-old woman named Lee Won-im disappeared while returning home from visiting her daughter. 4 days later, her family's worst fears were confirmed when her body was found dumped on some nearby farmland. Just over a month later, 25-year-old Park Yun-suk vanished after a bus ride back from Songtan. Her body was found just 2 days later, naked and strangled, floating in a local canal. The murders continued month after month for years. Always the same type of victim, always murdered in the same way. It was quite clear that Hwaseong had a dangerous and determined serial killer on their hands. The only trouble was, how would they go about catching him? The Hwaseong murders are notorious all over South Korea for being the country's first modern serial killer, especially in the sense that a particular modus operandi was applied to all known victims. However, the investigation was so intense and far-reaching that, after just a month's worth of police work, the list of suspects had grown to include a mind-boggling 21,000 different people. On top of that, a whopping 40,000 people had their fingerprints taken, but the true list of suspects could potentially be narrowed down to the few hundred that actually had DNA samples taken from them. Even shorter is the list who had hair samples taken, which is down to a mere 180 different people. Given that the murders had occurred all within a 4-mile radius of downtown Hwaseong, hundreds of pairs of police officers and volunteers were positioned within just 100 meters of one another. Their job was to patrol the surrounding area, keeping an eye out for anyone suspicious. But the killer simply worked out where police presence thinned out, and attacked there instead. It seemed that not only were the police unable to prevent the killer from striking again, but the killer himself was unable to resist the urge to hunt and to kill. The first big breakthrough came in September of 1988, when police were able to commission a composite sketch of the suspect, one based on the witness statements of a bus driver and his conductor. He was wiry, a shorter man, aged between 24 and 28 years old, with a sharp nose and short cropped hair. Some victims also described him as having soft hands, which suggested he had a mostly sedentary occupation, possibly as an office or textile worker. This description was corroborated with existing carnal assault reports, and the conclusion was chilling. Their suspect had been engaged in venal, predatory activity for almost a decade prior to killing for the first time, and it became apparent that South Korean police were dealing with one of the most fiendish and prolific criminals in the country's short history. It also appeared that the killer had a bizarre fixation which influenced not only his choice of victims, but also the timing of his attacks. It was noted that the killer's victims had been women wearing red clothing, and that they had been targeted on rainy days. This led some female police officers to set traps for him, walking alone in the greater Hwaseong area on rainy days while wearing items of red clothing. Yet it seemed the killer was wise to their ruse and avoided them altogether. The next major breakthrough came on July 27th of 1989, when analysis of a single hair found at one of the crime scenes led to the arrest of a 22-year-old male by the name of Yoon Sung Yao. Yet it was later revealed that this murder was totally unrelated to the others, and as positive as it was that police had caught themselves a murderer, the red clothing-obsessed serial killer was still on the loose, and the attempts to link all previous murders to their one suspect had arguably set the investigation back by years. Not only that, but it was later alleged that South Korean police had brutally beaten and tortured Yoon in their attempts to get a confession out of him. This meant that much of the evidence gained from his interrogations was completely inadmissible, and this caused a huge scandal with the South Korean police force. So much so that in December of 2019, police arrested 8 of the original investigators, charging them with falsifying documents, illegal detention, and physically abusing Yoon when he was in custody. It also became apparent that at least 4 possible suspects actually went so far as to take their own lives as a result of alleged police harassment. So, to say the police mishandled the case would be a grotesque understatement indeed. On the night of September 26, 1989, while the police were still investigating the Hwaseong serial killer, a home invasion occurred in the city of Suwon, just 13 miles from Hwaseong. The homeowner happened to be awake and confronted the armed burglar before calling the police. The man was arrested, identifying himself as Lee Chun-jae when questioned, and after a short trial in February of 1990, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Lee Chun-jae ended up being released after just 6 months, after an appeal hearing in which he claimed to have been the one who was attacked, and he'd simply run into the residence to seek shelter. Yet during those 6 months, something interesting happened. There was not a single new murder that could be attributed to the Hwaseong serial killer. Then just a few months after Lee Chun-jae's release, a 14-year-old girl was murdered whilst walking home from school on a rainy day, with investigators quick to note that she was carrying a red backpack. The killer was right under the noses of hundreds of homicide detectives working on the case, yet they failed to make any connections between Lee's imprisonment and the murderer's apparent hiatus. Lee Chun-jae remained quiet for a number of years, minimizing his murderous activities in the face of increasing police pressure. Yet in December of 1993, Lee Chun-jae's wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She was appalled by his prison sentence and noticed how he'd become increasingly withdrawn over the years that preceded his conviction. Little did she know, her husband had been the very same murderous psychopath that had been terrorizing the Hwaseong area, and leaving him would only cause the cauldron of evil inside of him to violently boil over. On January 13th of the following year, Lee Chun-jae contacted his 18-year-old sister-in-law, explaining that his soon-to-be ex-wife had forgotten a handful of her belongings. When his sister-in-law turned up to collect them, Lee Chun-jae dragged her inside, brutally violated her, then strangled the life from her. Then, in a sick display of false compassion, he approached his heartbroken father-in-law to offer his help in the search. It's truly horrifying to think that, despite his words, Lee Chun-jae was only there to soak up the family's suffering, to revel in the destruction and anguish he had wrought. Yet in the days that followed, police noted that on multiple occasions, Lee Chun-jae seemed to suggest that his sister-in-law had been abducted and murdered. This was before investigators had any inkling whatsoever of her fate, so the fact that he was so adamant on her abduction was highly suspicious. Lee Chun-jae was also heard to ask, "How many years in prison do you serve for violating someone and murder?" And it didn't take long until the police investigation was focused solely on him. Eventually, on January 18th of 1994, Lee Chun-jae was arrested as the prime suspect in his sister-in-law's murder, and although he initially denied all involvement, he was convicted and sentenced to death in May of the same year. Again, upon his imprisonment, the Hwasong serial killer apparently ceased to operate, but it would take 25 more years for them to connect the dots and realize that Lee Chun-jae was the monster that they had been looking for all along. On September 18th of 2019, South Korean police official announced that Lee Chun-jae was most likely the Hwasong serial killer. This is based on a DNA match taken from the underwear of one of the victims, and other evidence linked him to almost all of the others. All the police needed to do was coax a confession out of him, and given that he was already detained at Busan prison for the murder of his sister-in-law, investigators had direct, round-the-clock access to the man. It then just took over 2 weeks, but in early October, Lee Chun-jae confessed to killing 14 women and girls over a 6-year period. He also confessed to almost 30 carnal assaults, along with almost 100 attempted assaults that matched up with a number of unsolved reports. Psychologists noted that Lee displayed psychopathic tendencies by being unable to empathize with the victim's pain and suffering, and continuously showing off his crimes. One particularly remarkable aspect of this case is that before it was even solved, it became the basis for a popular South Korean movie directed by Bong Joon-ho, the same guy who directed the Academy Award-winning black comedy Parasite. Song Kang-ho and Kim Sang-kyung star as Detective Park and Detective So, respectively, two of the detectives trying to solve the crime, and the film ends with Detective Park looking straight at the camera, trying to spot the killer amongst the audience by using a special eye contact method. Obviously, it implied that the killer was still out there, maybe even watching the film among the audience in question, and audiences were terrified by such a realistic prospect. Fortunately for them, Lee Chun-jae was in prison for the murder of his sister-in-law, meaning moviegoers were safe from his predatory advances. But it definitely speaks to the morbid fascination society has with serial killers, how a horrifying series of murders can so fascinate us that we'll seek to glamorize and serialize it before the killer is even caught.
I work as a security/nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories and one of the oldest in the city. One night, I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 a.m. and I answer, "Hello, this is Daniel with front desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounds female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person that I could not understand them, and asked which apartment they were in, but again, gobbled the response. And I just made out 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them, and the same response, I said I couldn't understand them. I would go up and meet them in the hallway, so I go to the main elevators, and surprise, surprise, they are both on the 23rd floor. Fortunately, we have an older service elevator and it's only on the 7th, so I call it down, get it, and hit the button for the 23rd. But it won't move and the inner door won't close. But I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up. Door's still open and freaking out a bit, and the elevator is shaking because it goes up pretty fast, and as I'm ascending, I just stay towards the back, and finally, I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly, trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now, I head in the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are. And when I get to them, they're just sitting there and their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it would just be the elevator going Fritz. So I get in and figured out just reset them and get them to floor 1. When I heard the sound of the back stairwell closing, I quickly get out, go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, there's no one there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar. And at that time, I'm the only one in the building with a key. At the top of the building is a large machine room housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into there because it's creepy as hell, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point, I'm seriously freaked out, but muster up and head inside. "Hello," I shout, but to no response. The lights in the room flicker because they're terrible fluorescent, so I can't see well either. But at the end of the room, I can make up the roof access door and show us how it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by to make sure there's no one there. And there isn't. I open the roof door access. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wraparound if there was a jumper or something I needed to be sure. So I step out and leave the door ajar. Like it was almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now I might have written off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and really hard to open. Really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me, and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too, and go back to the 23rd floor hallway. Get into an elevator which the doors are still open for, and go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up. Don't say a word, and sure as hell, gobbly voice again. The only audible thing I can hear is a voice saying 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned off the ringer, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happening in this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the first floor once and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night, as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off, and I turned around to see a quick flash of myself walking past there. Must be some creepy ghost or something playing games with me at work. Why was it trying to leave me onto the roof of beer holding? I can only speculate perhaps it wanted to throw me off.
This is about the time when I used to work as a stripper in one of the strip clubs in Las Vegas, and it had only been a month since I started. Whenever I share my stripper stories with people, the most common question I get is, there are many jobs that you can do to earn money, so why are you stripping? Honestly, being a runaway from an orphanage and struggling to survive till you get 20 years old, you get a few ideas on where you could get good money. And for me, stripping seemed far better than stealing from people. Anyway, so I was pretty new to this stripper thing, and trust me, I saw a competition between those women who were working there. So they were no help at all, except for one girl, Kara. She seemed shy for a stripper, and after talking to her a few times, I found out it could be months for her since she started working there. The other girls were like hawks. They could tell by looking at a man how much money he'd be willing to throw on them, and what moves were best to get them to pull out their money. Since I had always been the kind of girl who learned by watching others, it wasn't hard for me to pick up on those moves myself. People coming here were all looking for fun and stuff, so it wasn't that big of a deal to wrap them around your fingers after showing some unique combination of moves. So slowly, I started to beat those girls and getting the most tips around the club. I often sneaked a few dollars and shared them with Kara later. The work in the club was strictly business, so outside that place, I was an entirely different person with dignity and all. I stopped telling people what I do for a living after giving a few negative responses, and even though stripping is still so common in Las Vegas, people's opinions of someone like me weren't pleasant ones. It sometimes stung when I saw the hungry look in those men's eyes in the club, who saw us as nothing more than prostitutes. But I tried to ignore it as much as I could. I remember the last time when I revealed my profession to someone. It was the guy that I had recently started dating, and he ended things with me the same moment by saying, "I don't think any man in their right mind would want to have a serious committed relationship with a girl like you." I'll admit, it hurt as hell, but I got over it pretty soon and decided I would never date. It was not for me whatsoever. I'm grateful for earlier. I turned as Kara's timid voice fell on my ears. I don't know what you're talking about. I tried not to look in her eyes. I know you took the blame in front of the managers, knowing it was me who stole the money, she said softly while looking down. I didn't. But now that you mention it, let me suggest that keep it to yourself. I walked away after saying that, but I could feel her gaze on my back the entire time. It was earlier that night when we were performing on stage. I went to the restroom, and when I was coming back, I saw Kara sliding dollar bills inside her bra, which were more than what she usually stole. After that, she went to the restroom, and I knew where she was going to hide the money. I knew she was having some problem at home because her brother was in a coma and all, so I acted as if I didn't see anything. But what I didn't know was that the money she stole had already been counted by the manager, and when he started asking questions, one of the older bitches ratted the two of us out, saying she'd been sliding money before. I took it. As I saw him leaning on Kara, whose face was getting paler by the minute, I shouted. He jolted his head back to me and walked over. "Where is it?" he asked in a loud, angry voice. But instead of replying, I stayed silent. Smack! A sharp slap came across my face, causing my jaws a stinging pain. "I'm asking where you put the money, bitch." He then grabbed my hair, pulled it back, and screamed in my face. I stayed silent, because I couldn't tell what I didn't have. But then another slap came right on the other cheek of my face, leaving the mark of his fingers on it. "Julie, strip this bitch, every single cloth, and check if she's hiding it in there somewhere." As he said that, she came forward with an evil smirk on her face, and even though she knew I never stripped naked even while performing, she did just that. A single tear of humiliation fell from my left eye as she searched my body, with every eye on the room on me. As I mentioned before, whatever I did here was strictly professional, and I never did such a thing when not working. So the rage I felt at that moment was beyond what one could imagine. He threatened me a few more times, but when I still didn't open my mouth after going through such humiliation, he let me go, while saying he was going to deduct the money from my pay. After Kara apologized to me, I went straight to my apartment, but I couldn't sleep thinking of whatever I just went through. It was when I came across an article that more than 200 people vanish each month in Las Vegas without a trace or possibility of coming back. I got an idea of what to do. The girl who ratted me out was Julie, and looking at how much she was enjoying ripping my clothes off my body, I had to teach her a lesson. Luckily for me, I knew where she lived. Not so much for her though. Her apartment was within 10 minutes of walking distance from the club, so I went straight to her place. By living on the streets and breaking into people's houses to steal, I had learned a thing or two, so unlocking her door and walking in there was a piece of cake. I was startled by a few muffling sounds, so I tried to listen closely, only to realize it was moaning and panting sounds coming out of her bedroom. I went ahead to watch the show. When I saw the manager on top of Julie, my blood started to boil. So these two were having an affair all this time. That was why she was so smug about ruining our lives. I grabbed the half-filled wine bottle that was on the kitchen top from the base in my other hand. I sneaked in there when they didn't notice, and by the time they could realize, I broke the wine bottle on the manager's head. Just before Julie could scream, I hit her with the vase. The two of them passed out that instant. I knew very well that they were just unconscious and not dead, but I wasn't going to let this chance go. I grabbed all the alcohol bottles from the kitchen and emptied its contents throughout the room. After starting a fire, I locked the bedroom from the outside and leaked the gas pipes in the kitchen before exiting her apartment. I was thinking of only scaring Julie by making her think that she was kidnapped, but the rage I felt after watching the two of them together brought back all the memories of their slaps and humiliation, and that turned me into an arsonist. Hey Kara, listen, do you want to move to New York with me? I think your brother could get better treatment there, and we could find a better strip club than this one too. What do you say? I called Kara as I was walking back to my apartment. Well, she didn't agree after all and said she would continue to work in Las Vegas, but would try to look for a better job than stripping. And I moved to New York the very next day since I didn't want to get caught after killing 2 people who bullied me. I still wonder how come police didn't find me. I know what I would have been seen as the prime suspect if a proper investigation was to be held. Maybe the owner of the club had something to do with it. Who knows? But whatever, it's in my favor, so who cares?
A little bit of backstory. I went to Miami earlier this year. Didn't know a lot of people there, but I still went. I was 20 at the time and not really jacked, but I know how to hold myself. I got there on a Saturday, and I knew that weekend nights at the beach are where the fun things happen. Night eventually rolled around, and I took an Uber to South Beach. I walked around for about an hour and a half and found a bench to sit down at to check my phone. As I'm sitting down minding my own business, a person walks up to me and sits on the same bench as me. I didn't think much of it. The place was packed, being that it's a weekend night. A few minutes pass by, and he starts up a conversation with me. I will refer to him as Dude. He seemed like a chill person, around the same age as me, average build. I'm usually really good at reading vibes, and I didn't get any negative vibes from him. I tell him that I'm new here, that I had arrived in Miami and that I didn't really know anyone here. That was probably my first mistake. My phone had started to die, and I also needed to use the restroom, but the bars and restaurants there won't let you use the restroom unless you are a customer. So I was shit out of luck. The dude told me that he has a place not far away from here and offered to let me come over to use the restroom and charge my stuff for a few minutes. Looking back now, I should have declined the offer, but I did take him up on the offer. We get to his place, and as soon as I enter, I got really odd vibes. His house was just giving off negative energy, but I don't want to pay it any attention. He tells me where I can plug my stuff in and shows me the way to the bathroom. So after using the bathroom, I walked back into the living room and sat down. My plan was to let my stuff charge for 15 to 20 minutes, then leave. The dude sits down beside me, and we actually had a pretty good conversation at first. He just seemed like a chill person who was trying to be nice. About 5 minutes after he sat down beside me, that's when things took a turn. He gets up, walks to the kitchen and pours 2 glasses of vodka, walks back to me and hands me one. I didn't want to come off as rude, so I took the glass and just held it. I wasn't trying to get drunk, especially around someone I just met. After he realized I wasn't drinking, he kept on trying to get me to drink. He kept saying stuff like,
"Come on, I just want to help you relax some."
I told him I didn't want to drink, and he got visibly upset. He started saying stuff like,
"I let you into my house and you can't take a shot with me?"
At this point, my gut was telling me to get the fuck out of there. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure his intentions weren't as pure as I had originally thought. As I was trying to figure out a way to leave without upsetting him, he starts to compliment my looks. As someone who was sexually assaulted 2 years ago, my fight or flight response was kicking in. I got up and acted like I was looking for my wallet in my backpack. I acted like I couldn't find it and that I probably left it at the beach. I said that I was going to walk back to the beach and that I would return when I found my wallet. And no, I definitely didn't plan on returning. I packed my stuff, and as I was doing so, the dude started laughing. It was such a demonic laugh, I'll never be able to get it out of my head. I bolt it out of the door and get to the sidewalk and start walking away. I'm not even off the block yet, and I hear his door open back up. The dude starts speed walking towards me as if he was following me, while he was still laughing demonically. My first thought was, okay, well, this is a serial killer. I'm about to be killed. I started to run. I don't know exactly how far I ran, but it was at least 5 blocks. Once I knew he wasn't following me anymore, I spent $10 on an Uber to get me far away from the area. The night was still young and I knew the nightlife would still be active on the beach. So I went back to the beach, just about 10 miles away from my original location, just to make sure if he went back there looking for me, that he wouldn't find me. To the dude who was trying to push himself on me, screw you.
I grew up in a place called Derry in Northern Ireland. You know that Norn Iron meme that's been going around? Hey, that's us. Anyway, I came up on a housing estate called Carn Hill. A wee bit rough, but generally an alright place to live. Carn Hill is basically like 9 or 10 little clusters of houses on like a ring road, but all with lovely green spaces between them. You could run about them, play football, just generally messing about, you know, and most of the rest of the estates could see you, so your mum always knew someone was keeping an eye on you. Carn Hill took a lot of guff from the British Army during the Troubles, so naturally we had a big IRA presence here too. And when the violence ended, not all the paramilitaries decided to give up the cause. Not only that, but younger lads who glorified all that bollocks wanted a piece of it too, and so they joined continuity organizations like the real IRA or Ogli Neherin to carry on the fight. But who do you fight when there's no British soldiers around no more? You can't really go around shooting the police because, as much as we don't like to admit it, they do keep us safe from mad Huns when it suits them. So, who do you go for? Who are the enemies of the community? If you're a real IRA man, the answer is obvious. You go after drug dealers. And an even bigger prize, you go after those that predatorize children. Historically speaking, the IRA used to do most of their punishment beatings or shootings in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. Seeing them be violent towards people who weren't outright Brits was bad PR, but after the continuity lot started targeting dealers and creeps, PR was a must-have. They wanted people to know that they were doing it, and they were proud of it. And what's most relevant to my story is that they wanted people to see it. So it's 2010, I'm 13 and I'm playing out with my friends during this lovely summer's evening. It's humid out, but with just the right amount of breeze, and I'm honestly dreading my mum calling me in for the night because I'm having such a good laugh. Normally she'd call me in, and I'd always manage to haggle a few more minutes out of her. It'd be this playful back and forth of 5 more minutes, Mom, please, and hey, go on then, but here, make sure you're no longer than 5. The bath's running for you, so it is. Only this time, my name gets called, and when I give my usual pushback, it's immediate, like, Selena, get your backside in here right now, young lady. My mom didn't shout, she barked it. And she was about to go through me for a shortcut, and I knew she most definitely wasn't kidding on. I say bye to my friends, then notice all their mums are coming out too, calling them inside. I was only 13, but I wasn't soft, and I quickly worked out that Mum was so agitated because 4 men had appeared on the green and were walking towards the wide open spot in the middle. As I reach my mom, she just tells me, "Go right up to your room and don't come out until I say." Now my bedroom faced the street out the front and all the commotion was out the back, so I only half obeyed my mom by heading upstairs, but then creeping into my parents' bedroom at the back of the house so I could watch what was going on. As you just heard, the entire green was deserted except for 4 men. 2 were younger lads, 2 were a bit older. One of the older fellows had this terrified look on his face and was being flanked by the 2 young lads with their faces covered, who every so often had to kind of push him along like he was dragging his feet. It was clear he didn't want to be there, but I could only wonder as to what had him so spooked like that. Anyway, right when the 4 men reached the middle of the green, they stopped. The older one at the back, who also had his face covered and was obviously the fellow in charge, started shouting all this stuff that I didn't quite understand at first. But then it became clear that the man they had with them had done something really bad, and it dawned on me that they were about to publicly punish him for it. But then, just when my sympathy for the man had reached its peak, the fellas with their faces covered said one of the few things I actually really understood, that the man they were about to punish was someone who had touched a child. I think that might have gotten a gasp out of just about everyone in the estate, and it completely shifted the dynamic of what we were witnessing, because as much as what happened next was grim, I now understand that the real horror of what happened that day was that those men had the consent of the community to do what they did. Most people in Northern Ireland are tired of violence, but the vast majority of us, older and younger, just want to live our lives in peace. We've lived through more than 100 years of struggle, both north and south of the border, and if you can manage to elicit a bit of bloodlust from us, trust me, that's no mean feat. Then right before our eyes, the younger men forced their prisoner onto his stomach and held him in place while their leader took what looked like a gun out of one of his jacket pockets. Then bang. The man screamed like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was blood-curdling. I know that's cliched, but it's true. It was a sound I found myself physically recoiling from, and from what I understand, this first shot was to the back of the man's kneecap. Bang. Another shot, and another scream. The second sounded sadder than the first. I know that sounds weird, but it was more like a groan than a scream towards the end. Maybe he just didn't have the breath in his lungs anymore, who knows, but what's for certain is that this shot was to his other kneecap. He'd probably never walk properly again, not for the rest of his life, but I doubt that there was a single ounce of sympathy on their entire estate. I don't think they have flinched if they had blown his head off, but they didn't blow his head off. They shot something else off instead. Bang. Just when I thought I'd heard the most horrifying scream in my life, the third one tops it all. It was this undulating howl up and down and rasping at the end, that all you could hear was sobbing, this ugly sobbing as the masked men stood up and walked away. I don't really know what I was expecting to happen next. I mean, a man had just been shot 3 times. There could be little doubt that he was in danger of bleeding to death. You'd think someone in a good Christian community like ours would bother to check on him, regardless of the crime he'd been accused of. But no. It took half an hour for ambulance crews to reach us, and this isn't a place where the average response time is about 10 minutes. To me, that means people actually debated for a full 10 to 15 minutes whether or not they'd actually call for help for that guy. There were people on the estate who were happy to let the man die in front of their children that day, based on pure hearsay. Well, I say hearsay, but it did turn out to be true. The statement released by the PSNI condemned the way the man was attacked, but it didn't deny what he was. Lo and behold, the man, who will remain nameless here, was convicted of offenses just a year or so prior and had moved over to Derry to start a new life. The paramilitaries tracked him down and told him to leave, and when he refused, they came for him. There's a lot of people, both at the time and now, who tell me they don't care if that guy was shot, how he got exactly what he deserved. And if he couldn't properly walk again, oh well, it meant our kids would be a wee bit safer. But I don't want to live in a place where that kind of violence is on view to the public. Civilized societies deal with their criminals without violence and away from the innocent eyes of children. They shot that man because he abused children, but what's shooting someone in front of children, if not child abuse as well? I'm not trying to equate the two, don't get me wrong, but I'd like to think that monsters can only live on the fringes of society, and I don't think I could handle the realization that monsters are all around me, just pretending to be normal, regular people, when really, they're just as savage and brutal as those they profess to hate.
About a year ago, in my final semester in college, I worked at a department store in the mall. I didn't have a car yet, so I asked for the day shifts because it was a 2-hour bus ride back home. So basically, if I had a closing shift, I'd get done at 11 but not get home until around 1 a.m. But sometimes I'd be given a closing shift, much to my annoyance since I had class at 6 a.m. And my mother worries about me because who wants their kid on public transportation at night? My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of closing shifts, knowing my situation. I was pissed, but whatever. So one night, I had just finished my shift and I got on the bus. I sat in the middle of the bus. I was minding my own business with my earbuds in. I usually did that because I didn't like people talking to me, so I made it look like I was listening to music. And I occupied myself by playing a crossword puzzle on my phone. About 5 seats behind me, I hear these guys speaking Spanish. Now my mother is Dominican, but people never know that I am, so while I understand a fair bit of Spanish, I don't speak it. So I hear them talking, but I don't pay any attention because it's rude to eavesdrop. All until they say, "That kid in front of us." Then my ears perk up. I keep my earbuds in so that they think I can't hear them. And I continue to listen. What they're saying is horrific. To paraphrase it, they knew my stop because they've been watching me for this week. And to put it simply, they were planning on snatching me. I heard them say that I'll disappear like the others. I was about 20 minutes away from home, so I knew I had to act quickly. Since I knew they could see me, there were 5 seats behind me, but like a cross, if that makes sense. I pretended to play on my phone, oblivious while I was actually texting my mom. Then all of a sudden, one of the guys moved 3 seats ahead of me, and the other one moved about 3 seats behind me. And we're the last ones on the bus. I text my mom, "Can you please meet me at the bus stop?" 5 minutes go by, no answer. We're getting closer to my stop, so I decided to call her cell. No answer. I call the house phone and she finally answers. At this point it's about 12:30 a.m., so she was asleep. I try to talk as calmly as I can. This was our conversation. "Hey mom, did you get my text?" No. What's up?" "Oh, I sent you a picture of these jeans I'm gonna order online when I get home. I really need your opinion, so I really need you to look, since the sale ends at 1 a.m. She gets the hint that I need her to look at her cell phone, so I say goodbye and I hope for the best. I tied my Adidas very tight. We get to my stop and I see my mom's car. I stand up. Then the man in front of me stands up. Then the guy behind me stands up. I snatch my stuff and I sprint to the door and I got off the bus, with both men behind me, both yelling at each other to grab me. I didn't even look behind me. My mom sees the whole thing and jumps out of the car. I yell at her to get back in the car because they couldn't catch me. I hauled ass. I jump in the car and I tell my mom, "Just go." I look in the rear view and I see the guy staring at the car. The next morning, I called my job and I tell them that I quit. No more public transportation for me. Thanks to my mom for teaching me Spanish, and thanks to my mom for getting the hint.
Last year, after a blissful first year of living in a new apartment, all on my own for the first time, a man moved in next door that I will never forget. The layout of the apartment is crucial to understand this incident, so I made a little diagram floor plan taken from the closest thing I could find online and edited. The most important part is that my balcony and his balcony are only partially separated by a wall, and there is a solid 2-foot gap in which you can easily walk from one to the other. For context, I previously had a very lonely woman living next door for the entire first year I lived there, who never crossed this balcony threshold without being explicitly invited. I only throw this in there so you can understand I wasn't previously concerned about someone infiltrating my space. The first time I met this new neighbor, and he was unloading groceries from his massive truck into the assigned parking spot next to mine. As I was driving up, he and a girl I assumed to be his girlfriend were unloading boxes from Costco. I noticed them speaking, and as soon as I was out of the car, they went silent. I nodded to them, proceeded to the elevator, and the guy ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and begged me to wait. No problem, I'm a good neighbor. While in the elevator, the girlfriend refuses to make eye contact or speak to me. A little weird, but I just thought she was shy. But he quickly introduced himself and was extremely chatty. In the 45 seconds it takes to get the floor where our apartments are, he asked how I liked the place, where I was from, and where I worked. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little strange, but I chalked it up to him being excited to be in a new place. For the sake of the rest of this story, we'll call him Sam. Sam was maybe 33, 6 foot tall, with a slim, muscular build, and had hair bust extremely short, as if the mask is balding. Pretty average looking by all accounts. The first few weeks we run into each other often, and always make small talk, and always refers to me as Miss. I assume it's because he forgot my name, but wanted to be polite. I almost never see his girlfriend after the first night, but occasionally I can hear him talking to a lady in his apartment, as the walls are reasonably thin. One night, about 3 months after Sam moved in, my boyfriend is spending the nights, and we were watching movies on the couch. It's maybe 11:30 p.m. The back of the couch is against the wall I share with Sam, and we hear some banging noise. My first thought is that him and his girlfriend must be getting it on. Boyfriend and I laugh and turn the volume up a bit to drown them out. Then, in addition to the banging, the neighbors begin to scream. We can hear objects being thrown, glass shattering. The words are muffled, but there's distinctively anger and crying going on. My boyfriend, Jim that he is, steps onto the semi-shared balcony and in his loudest voice heels over without crossing on the Sans balcony. "Everything okay in there?" The girl opens the sliding door on Sam, sight a minute or two later, and says sorry about that. So we leave it alone. I'm concerned, but we have no idea what actually happened and decide to go to bed. Big mistake, I know. I wake up around 3 a.m. to more screaming, but my boyfriend refuses to wake up, and I'm not about to take my 5-foot self to break up whatever is going on at 3 a.m. I considered calling the police, but was so drowsy, I convinced myself I dreamed it. I deeply regret that decision. The next morning, I woke up to some terrible personal news, an entirely unrelated death of a friend, and pretty much put the events of that night on the back burner. I didn't forget, but it also wasn't on my mind. Fast forward about 2 weeks. It's a warm day, and I'm outside reading a book in a robe, bra, and shorts. I'm going to chair the faces away from Sam's apartment, so I can't see his side from where I am. I'm deep in my book, when suddenly I get a tap on the shoulder. Sam is standing behind me and asked if we can talk for a second. This man has already crossed an albeit invisible line by coming on my side of the balcony, but I also can't get to my door without physically moving him aside. So I asked him what's going on. He told me it was his birthday and asked if I knew where to get some Mary Jane, because I seem like a girl who knows how to have a good time, as we live in a state where that stuff is legal. I told him that I'm sure Google would provide the best dispensary in the area, but I personally didn't have any. He proceeds to tell me how drunk he got last night, and at this point, I'm itching for an exit. As I start to move as if to signal I'm done talking, he reaches out from my shoulder and tells me he hit and scratched my car last night because he was driving very, very wasted. Remember his massive truck? He says all of this with a smile on his face, almost laughing. I'm surprised, but mostly when I get away from him because my creep senses are starting to tingle, and I don't want to blow up at him for hitting my car. He says he'll send me his insurance info if I give him my number, and thankfully, I knew that would be a bad call. I made a bad, nervous joke about knowing where he lived and said if the damage was bad enough, I would knock on his door to get his insurance. He counters by saying he will leave a note with his info on my door. He retreats from the balcony while also saying he'd prefer to just pay me cash and not involve insurance. I give it an hour or so, and then I head down to assess the damage. I did this because I didn't want to walk down at the same time as him and risk having him follow me. Sure enough, there are 2 long new scratches on the driver's door and knock deep, just kind of superficial or worthy of a call to insurance immediately. I really just didn't want to get involved with him in any way, so I decided I could deal with the scratches. But this little event has kind of shaken me. At this point, I knew something was off with him. Nothing unusual happens as far as I'm aware this night. The next day is Saturday, and as I had to work the next day, I'm home alone, watching some action, a movie, and it's around 11 p.m. I'm on the sofa with my cat curled up on me, and the movie is relatively loud, so it takes me a little while to register this banging noise coming from the hallway of my apartment building. I honestly only noticed because my cat had woken up and got all puffed up and freaked out. I turned down the volume of the film, and suddenly, the banging is getting louder and louder. And just as I stand up, I hear the 5 words no one wants to hear coming from their door. "Open up. It's the police." My stomach dropped to the floor. I had lied to Sam the day before. I totally did have some ganja on me, and I had smoked a joint outside on the balcony, the part furthest away from Sam's maybe 20 minutes before. I'm totally panicked, high as a kite, and trying to control my breathing so I don't immediately come off as suspicious before I answer the door. I remember checking the people to see a close-up of a cop's face, and then open the door, coming face to face with 6 officers, all with guns drawn. I'm about 0.5 seconds away from completely peeing my pants in fear, still convinced I'm somehow in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer who seems to be in charge can sense instantly the level of panic, and he says, "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. We need to speak with you about your neighbor. Can we come in?" At this point, I'm reeling, and my whole being is tense. I let the cops in, but my heart hasn't moved from my throat. The policeman in charge asked me about any interactions with Sam. I told them I barely know him, that he just lives next door, moved in a few months ago. I asked why they needed to be in my apartment. I'm scared, but also I don't typically get along with cops, and I have the right to know why 6 of them practically waved their guns in my face. The lead officer proceeds to tell me that Sam was a bad guy. He apparently beat his girlfriend so bad the night prior that she's now in the ICU for her injuries. They also told me Sam had a gun and had barricaded himself in the apartment next to mine. They said they had spoken to my building manager and knew my place had access to his balcony, and they needed to use it. Then they asked me to go into the bedroom and lock the doors and turn the lights off. The next 30 to 45 minutes were complete torture. In my panic, I left my cell phone on the kitchen counter and had to sit in my room, just listening to the commotion. No shots were ever fired, but there was a lot of yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the main officer knocked on my door and told me that Sam had been arrested and thanked me for letting them use my apartment. They asked me questions for maybe 15 more minutes and left. I wish this is where the story ended. There's a bit more. In the days following Sam's arrest, I became even more panicked about him coming back to the apartment building, worried about retaliation. I hadn't said anything to the police to technically incriminate him. I had proof of nothing except his word that he was the one who scratched my car, but I did tell them about the night my boyfriend and I heard them fight. About 5 days later, Sam reappeared at the building as I was coming home from work one evening. He tried to approach me, but the elevator shut just as he was running to catch it. My whole body got tense, like the feeling when you come this close to getting in a car accident but narrowly avoid it. I stayed off my balcony entirely from this point and always kept the curtains closed. We didn't speak or rarely see each other at all for another few weeks, and then had our final interaction. Sam stopped me in the parking lot one night, running after me as I was about to get on the elevator. He begged me to tell him why I let the cops in that night. I told him the honest truth, but I was stoned, didn't know what to do, and had a bad history with cops. This is all true, and again, I was concerned about him trying to retaliate. He then got pretty upset and kept trying to repeat the question, obviously wanting a different answer. When I couldn't give him one, he then offered me $3,000 to testify as a character witness on his behalf. Because I knew him and knew how he really treated women, I was speechless and very freaked out. He told me his hearing was the next Thursday morning, and he asked if I could show up. I was like a deer frozen in headlights for a moment, and then somehow got out of there after mumbling a string of words that were most likely incoherent. The Wednesday night before his trial, I came home from work and my cat was acting kind of weird, like something had just booked her and her tail was all puffed out. I kinda shook it off, but I noticed through the curtains that there was something taped to the outside of my sliding glass door. Apparently, Sam had left a post-it with his phone number and name, and underneath, "I'm counting on you." Needless to say, I never showed up. I took a photo of the post, had grabbed my cat, locked all of my doors, and stayed at my mom's house for about 5 days after that happened. I did phone the police to let them know he had been on my balcony again, but they never followed up with anything. Eventually, my boyfriend came and went back to my place together. Everything was as it should have been. I never saw Sam again. But a few weeks later, a lady that I'd never seen before was cleaning out his apartment. Maybe a month after that, new people moved in, and things have been normal ever since. I tried calling the police in the county jail to see if he was in lockup again, but no one was able to release information to me. I'm hoping that means he's there. If he did what the police said he did. So to Sam, I will say I'm not really sure what happened. But my biggest regret is not calling the police when I felt like I should have. And my gut and I hope to God I never see you when you get out.
You might be able to describe 17-year-old David Faraday as the all-American boy. David was clean-cut, a good student, and a member of the Boy Scouts of America. He was also apparently something of a moral arbiter, having once confronted a marijuana dealer outside of his high school when the man had apparently been attempting to peddle the drug to members of the student body. After threatening to inform the police, the dealer was said to never have hung around the high school again. And although by today's standards we might consider this to be so-called snitch behavior, David was clearly simply trying to protect his fellow students from something he was concerned would affect their academic performance. He was a good person, with a good heart, and almost all of what he did came from a place of love. But like many boys his age, David found himself increasingly interested in the opposite gender. And there was one particular young lady that caught his attention over all others. Betty Lou Jensen was 16, a year younger than David, but she was incredibly popular and her reputation as a charming, well-mannered young lady preceded her. She was also a very talented artist who took a great deal of interest in all things creative. It was at a local youth function that David got the chance to talk to Betty Lou, and his affection for her seemed to be entirely reciprocated. Betty Lou shared a great deal with him and even invited him to visit her after school so that he could walk her home. After a few weeks of wholesome teenage dating, something of a relationship began to blossom between the two bright-eyed young people. But all was not entirely well, as there was another boy who had his eye on Betty Lou, one who was not about to let David have her all to himself. He squared up to David when the young man was waiting outside of Betty Lou's high school. And although the confrontation didn't become physical, some pretty harsh insults were exchanged and David was warned to stay away from his new girlfriend. Other boys might have been deterred by such a display of possessiveness and aggression, but not David. He was determined to secure his place as the only boy in Betty Lou's life, and so one afternoon on their way home from school, David asked Betty if she'd like to go on a date with him, their first date, and to his absolute elation, Betty Lou said yes. David racked his brain for a solid first date idea, and given that it was late December, decided that a great way to capture that festive romantic spirit would be to take Betty Lou to a local Christmas event. And being the gentleman that he was, he made a promise to her parents to have her back home by 11 p.m. at the very latest. Rumor has it that David and Betty were planning on attending the Christmas-themed party with a few other local high school students. But perhaps this was simply a cover to reassure the young girl's parents, because what we know for certain is that they ended up driving over to Lake Herman Road in David's Rambler station wagon, parking it up in quite a well-known spot that was known to many as Lover's Lane. The whole appeal of the spot near Lake Herman is that it was quiet and unfrequented by members of the public, hence why young couples might use it to gain some privacy for certain unsavory activities. But it wasn't just infatuated lovebirds who noted the location's seclusion, because someone else wished to take advantage of the isolation for something that was considerably more malicious. At some point during their stay up on Lover's Lane, David and Betty Lou noticed another car pull into the spot, one that parked up alongside them before turning its lights off. At first, David and Betty were worried it was the cops, come to arrest them for committing lewd acts in public. But as they peered through the darkness to study the vehicle next to them, it became increasingly obvious that it was not in fact the police. All the young couple could do was watch, growing increasingly scared as the shadowy silhouette in the front seat stayed statue still, staring at them through the passenger's window. Betty Lou told David she was spooked and asked him to see if he could get the person to leave. But unlike previous encounters where David's bravery had shone through when confronted with a source of maliciousness, he too was far too frightened to do anything. But as he prepared to start up the Rambler's engine so he could drive Betty Lou out of there, the driver of the other vehicle got out and approached David's side of the Rambler. David was transfixed, frozen in fear like a deer in a car's headlights, but when he saw the mysterious stranger pull out a pistol and aim it at his window, his flight response kicked into gear. Betty threw open the passenger side door, throwing herself from the Rambler before David followed suit, but neither kid was fast enough to outrun a bullet. The stranger fired once through the roof of the Rambler, then sprinted around the back to fire another shot at David through the vehicle's rear window. Both shots hit the young man, and he crawled along the ground near the station wagon's back wheel on the passenger side, trying and failing to escape. Betty Lou, however, began to sprint away through the darkness as the first shots were fired, but the stranger was fast. He took aim and fired 5 shots at the right side of her back, each bullet striking her torso before she fell. As she lay dying in the darkness, the killer turned his attentions back to David, pointing the pistol towards his head and pulling the trigger one last time, sending a bullet crashing into his skull just behind his left ear. Apparently, the killer then simply got back into his car and drove away into the night. Sometime later, someone who drove past the spot on Lover's Lane must have seen the bodies lying in the dirt, and then rushed to call the police. David was still breathing when they arrived on the scene, but was completely unresponsive, and was dead on arrival when he was finally taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. The double homicide stunned and horrified the local community, and rumors abounded that there was a crazed, firearm-wielding madman on the loose, with it only being a matter of time before they struck again. One of the first people contacted by the police as a potential suspect in the murders was the young man who had confronted David as a result of his own jealousies over his and Betty Lou's blossoming relationship. But it was discovered that this young man had a strong alibi for his whereabouts, meaning there was no way he could have been the mysterious bloodthirsty stranger who pulled into Lover's Lane that night. As the summer of 1969 drew to a close, journalists and law enforcement alike wondered if the teenage lover's killer would ever be found, but little did they know that the nightmare had just began, and what would follow would continue to baffle all those involved for decades to come. Because the man who took David and Betty Lou's lives that evening, the man who relentlessly fired bullet after bullet into the Rambler station wagon, would come to be known by a name that would echo through the annals of true crime all over the world: the Zodiac. Zodiac's identity remains a complete mystery even to this day. The killer's nickname originated from a series of taunting letters and cards sent to the San Francisco Bay Area press. These letters included 4 cryptograms based around a number of ciphers, one of which was recently solved by the FBI after over 50 years of research and study. We know for certain that the Zodiac murdered 5 people in Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco in the 11 months spanning December of 1968 and October of 1969. It seems he preferred to target young couples, which is how he seemed to have come across David and Betty Lou while the pair were on their first date. Yet despite only 5 confirmed victims being attributed to the Zodiac, he once claimed to have murdered 32 other people, bringing his total body count to 37 victims. A killing spree that started with 2 young lovers, so excited to finally have some time alone together on their first date, never being able to imagine that it would end in such a brutal moment of painful finality. So the next time you're on a first date, don't be so quick to go somewhere secluded, as you never know who might be watching or following, just ready to turn a perfect romantic moment into a living nightmare.